Coruscant is the shining center of the galaxy. Its towers hold the Senate, the Jedi Temple, and a trillion citizens. And from orbit, it looks like a single jewel of light, but that light only reaches the top. The planet runs thousands of levels deep, and everything the city above does not want to see gets pushed down and forgotten. Failure, crime, abandoned people, and secrets older than the Republic all sink to the bottom and stay there. This is the lore of Coruscant, and it is far darker than the clean skyline suggests. What lies beneath the capital is not just poverty, it is the buried foundation the fall of the Republic was built on. To find it, you travel straight down through the city, one level at a time, starting at the very top.
Level 5127 represents the absolute summit of Coruscant's construction. This is the surface level, the only elevation on the entire planet where natural sunlight reaches the streets without filtering through thousands of levels of buildings above. During the final years of the Galactic Republic, all of Galactic City's most important structures existed at this elevation. The Senate Rotunda dominated the skyline, its massive dome sheltering representatives from 10,000 star systems who conducted the business of galactic governance. Nearby stood the Jedi Temple, 5 ancient spires that had served as headquarters of the Jedi Order for over 1,000 generations. But the surface level depended on the infrastructure hidden below. The Senate District occupies kilometers of territory on level 5127, featuring senatorial apartments and high-security complexes near the Senate building. Parks like the Gardens of Equality and Justice provide green space for senators between sessions. The district is protected by the blue-robed Senate guards, who stand watch at building entrances and delegate platforms. They breathe air that has not been recycled 5,000 times through filtration systems that should have been replaced decades ago. This level houses senators, diplomats, high-ranking government officials, and the extremely wealthy who can afford the astronomical cost of surface-level real estate. When the Galactic Empire replaced the Republic in 19 BBY, level 5127 transformed along with the government it hosted. The Compnor Arcology was constructed as a massive complex housing the Commission for the Preservation of the New Order and its propaganda apparatus. The Senate building remained standing but lost its legislative power as Emperor Palpatine consolidated authority. Meanwhile, the Jedi Temple became the Imperial Palace after Order 66 eliminated the Jedi, with its halls converted into administrative centers and Palpatine's personal residence. The surface level maintained its social functions throughout the Imperial era. Wealthy residents continued hosting events in penthouses while diplomats negotiated treaties. The level's high-end establishments operated without interruption despite the changing government. What made all of this possible lay 127 levels below. Level 5127's infrastructure depended entirely on Level 5000. Level 5000, situated just 127 levels below the surface, presents a stark contrast to the luxury above. While Level 5127 receives natural sunlight, Level 5000 operates without it, providing power for all levels above. This level houses Coruscant's central power distribution grid, featuring massive generators that produce enough energy to illuminate entire star systems if pointed in the right direction. The machinery operates continuously, producing a low-frequency hum audible throughout the entire level. The Clone Wars demonstrated how vital Level 5000 was to Coruscant's survival when Separatist infiltrator demolition droids, operating under General Grievous's orders, targeted the central power distribution generator. The strike destroyed machinery that had run continuously for centuries, triggering a cascade failure that spread across the grid within 2 minutes. Entire sectors of the upper city lost power instantly. Hospitals experienced life support failures, and traffic control networks went offline, sending speeders colliding into buildings across multiple districts. Within hours, the casualty count reached into the thousands, prompting the Senate to convene an emergency session that resulted in bank deregulation legislation, accelerated clone production, and further expanding Chancellor Palpatine's wartime authority. In Legends continuity, a separate incident involving the Star of Isken strike triggered the Enhanced Security and Enforcement Act through similar mechanisms. with both incidents serving to expand Palpatine's power. Level 5000 also explains Coruscant's numbering system. Higher numbers indicate higher altitudes. Level 1 sits at the bottom, built on the planet's actual surface before millennia of construction buried it, while level 5127 sits at the top, reaching into the stratosphere where the air grows thin. Everything in between was constructed over 25,000 years of continuous building. Level 5000 marks a boundary between the elite districts above and what Coruscant natives call the underlevel below, which operates under different social and economic conditions than the surface. The generators here run on fusion cores that could vaporize a city block if mishandled, so thousands of technicians work in rotating shifts, monitoring power flows and preventing meltdowns. They live in utilitarian housing blocks built directly into the generator infrastructure and rarely visit the surface levels. Yet, their work determines whether billions of beings above have light, heat, and air. The mid-4000 levels reveal the industrial infrastructure that sustained the upper city. Dropping into the 4000s, we leave behind the elite residential spires and enter the upper undercity, a middle band of older industrial zones, commercial districts, and government facilities that keep the machinery of civilization moving forward. Level 4888 exemplifies this zone. Imperial-era records describe it as a manufacturing district that produced everything from droid components to military uniforms around the clock. The factories operate continuously, staffed by beings who have never seen actual daylight and never will during their entire lives. During the Clone Wars, these facilities produced equipment for the Grand Army of the Republic at a pace that would have been impossible without automation and three-shift rotations. After the Empire took control, they switched to producing stormtrooper armor and TIE fighter components without missing a single production quota. The machinery does not care who wins the conflict or what ideology drives the orders. It keeps running, fed by workers who understand that stopping means losing their jobs to someone more desperate. Level 4643 appears in bureaucratic records, but little else. Mentioned in shipping manifests and transit logs, the kind of level that exists but does not matter to anyone important enough to remember it. Warehouse districts like this stretch for kilometers in every direction, storing goods that will be shipped to 1,000 worlds. Cargo speeders move through enclosed highways, hauling containers from landing bays to distribution centers, transporting products that keep the galaxy's economy flowing, while the haulers earn enough credits to avoid starvation. Small cantinas operate in alcoves between warehouses, serving shift workers, while families live in compact apartments carved into old factory buildings. The numbering system reveals something crucial about Coruscant's structure. Level 3204, known as the Alderaanian District, demonstrates how mid-levels functioned during the Republic's height. Alderaanian expatriates constructed an entire neighborhood here, recreating their homeworld's architecture in miniature despite the astronomical cost and engineering challenges. The district featured towers built in Alderaanian architectural style, alongside artificial gardens where specially treated plants grew under UV lamps that simulated Alderaan's sun. The district thrived for centuries, hosting diplomats and artists who wanted a taste of their homeworld without leaving the capital. Then, the Death Star destroyed Alderaan in 0 BBY, and the district transformed overnight into a memorial, a ghost neighborhood where survivors gathered to mourn a homeworld they could never see again. The Empire sealed off the district temporarily, claiming it required investigation, but the real concern was the grief and rage building in the streets. Eventually, the district reopened, but it was never the same. The gardens fell into disrepair, and the buildings stood empty. After the Empire's fall, the fate of Level 3204 remains undocumented in official records. Below 3000, Coruscant's entertainment districts begin. These levels sprawl across kilometers, offering gambling, clubs, and various legal and illegal experiences. Holographic billboards tower 5 stories high, advertising shows and establishments, and the streets operate continuously, since no natural day-night cycle exists this far from the surface. But not everyone who entered these entertainment districts came looking for pleasure. The Uscrew Entertainment District on the upper end of this zone became notable during the Republic's final days. Jedi sometimes walked these crowded streets, pursuing bounty hunters or tracking separatist agents through masses of pleasure seekers who did not want to know about galactic politics. Anakin Skywalker chased the shapeshifter Zam Wesell through Uscrew's airways in 22 BBY during the final days of the Republic before the Clone Wars began, dodging traffic while she fled toward the Outlander Club and whatever safety she thought waited there. When he finally caught her in an alley behind a cantina, she fell, attempting to reveal warnings about a plot bigger than anyone imagined. The Outlander Club deserves special mention in any discussion of Coruscant's entertainment culture. This massive establishment sprawled across multiple sublevels, offering gambling, drinks, and end sticks to anyone with credits to spend and discretion to forget what they saw. Inside, a dozen species mingled in the main room while music played continuously. The crowd mixed in ways that would be impossible on the surface. Laborers spending their week's wages, senators slumming for thrills they could not find in legal establishments, smugglers making deals that would never appear in official records, and Jedi hunting leads that might prevent the next crisis. Contraband changed hands in dark corners away from the main floor, while beings exchanged information for payment, understanding that information held more value than gold when used properly. In Attack of the Clones, Obi-Wan Kenobi used a Jedi mind trick on end-stick dealer Ilan Selsabagno here. According to supplementary material, Selsabagno did rethink his life afterward, opening a legitimate fruit business. Further down in the entertainment districts, the Outlander Club was just one establishment among thousands competing for attention. The galaxy's Opera House sat in the district's heart, hosting performances that drew audiences from across the galaxy. The entertainment districts also contained Coruscant's underworld justice system. Level 2623 presents another face of Coruscant that the tourism holovids never mention: justice, underworld style. This level houses detention facilities, prisons built into the city's skeleton, where beings who break the law are stored until someone decides what to do with them. When security forces arrest someone in the lower levels, they do not haul them all the way up to the surface for processing. Too much trouble, too much risk of escape, too much paperwork explaining why a prisoner slipped away during transport. Instead, they place offenders in detention blocks like the one on level 2623, where cells are carved into solid duracrete, and the only light comes from force fields securing the cells. During the High Republic era, over 300 years before the Clone Wars, authorities arrested the intoxicated Toydarian on level 1392 for disturbing the peace. They dragged him down to a detention block on level 2623 to sober up and contemplate his poor life choice, a journey that started 1,392 levels from the planetary core, dropped another 1,231 levels down to his cell, where he would spend the next few days regretting every decision that led to that moment. This single arrest illustrates how Coruscant handles lawbreaking at different altitudes. The upper levels receive courts, lawyers, and due process that can drag on for months, while the lower levels receive a cell on level 2623 until authorities decide the prisoner is no longer worth the trouble, then release them back onto the streets with a warning that will not stick. These detention levels serve purposes beyond simple punishment, functioning as staging areas where dangerous lawbreakers wait while investigators figure out what to do with them. Some prisoners get transferred upward for formal trials that might result in justice. Others are released due to overcrowding because authorities could not be bothered to process them properly, and some simply disappear into the system, lost in the bureaucracy of a planet with over 1 trillion inhabitants, where keeping track of everyone is impossible. On Coruscant, it's easy to vanish if not important enough for anyone to remember. Level 2046 offers a glimpse of ordinary life in the mid-levels during the Empire's reign. This level housed a community of workers who kept Coruscant's systems running without ever receiving credit for their essential labor. They repaired atmospheric processors that recycled the air everyone breathed, maintained water distribution systems that delivered clean water to billions of homes above them, and cleaned waste recycling plants that no one wanted to think about, but everyone depended on daily. Despite its importance, this essential maintenance work received little recognition. A thriving market operated on Level 2046 despite the challenging economic conditions, with shops selling everything from replacement parts to fresh food, though produce quality varied after being shipped through 5,000 levels of the city. One establishment, Desi's Noodles, became a local landmark by operating across multiple levels and serving cheap meals to workers, specializing in a synthetic noodle dish that cost barely a credit and provided enough calories for an 8-hour shift. But even these modest lives came under pressure as the Empire tightened its grip on every aspect of Coruscant society. Imperial officers started running protection rackets on Level 2046, demanding regular payments in exchange for security services that everyone understood as threats. Stormtroopers would walk into shops, lean against counters, and casually mention that maintaining order was not free, and accidents happened to businesses that did not contribute to community safety. Many shop owners paid because they understood the alternative. Some resisted out of principle or pride. Those who resisted discovered their businesses mysteriously burned down, or their suppliers suddenly refused to deliver goods for reasons they would not explain. By the late Imperial period, Level 2046 was perishing slowly from systematic exploitation. Shops closed prematurely, and families moved away seeking opportunities elsewhere, or descended to even cheaper levels where rent was affordable. The meatpacking plant that employed hundreds shut down after Imperial inspectors declared it unsanitary, despite it passing the same inspections for decades under the Republic, because the real reason was simpler and more corrupt. The plant owner refused to pay bribes to officials who controlled the inspection process. This pattern of Imperial extortion repeated across thousands of levels throughout the Empire's reign, systematically suppressing local businesses and communities. Below Level 2000, the city becomes something else entirely. Natural light does not reach these levels, which means residents live their entire lives without seeing sunlight. The air is stale, recycled through ancient filtration systems so many times that it carries a metallic taste, while buildings press together, leaving only narrow passages for streets. Meanwhile, the infrastructure shows visible strain, sagging durasteel beams, walls bulging under pressure, and cracks sealed with temporary foam. These levels form the structural foundation that supports everything above. With infrastructure, support beams, power conduits, ventilation systems, keeping the upper levels functioning. Yet law enforcement rarely patrols these areas. They come in armored convoys when they absolutely have to, when a situation on a lower level threatens to spread upward where important people might notice. Then leave as fast as possible because every moment spent down here is a moment where something might go wrong. The gangs understand this dynamic and control these levels through force. Their territorial control operates openly without any pretense of legitimacy. Level 1782 earned its reputation as an endless junkyard, a place where Coruscant dumps its mistakes and broken things. Crash speeders pile in heaps 5 stories high, their twisted metal frames forming unstable piles of debris that shift without warning, while broken droids rust in scattered pieces with their valuable parts scavenged by whomever arrived first. Old building materials, outdated technology, discarded furniture from upper-level homes, all of it ends up here, accumulating over decades of dumping from upper levels. But people live here despite the dangers and squalor. They carve homes into the scrap heaps, welding together shelters from starship hulls and sheet metal salvaged from demolished buildings. They hunt through the junk for salvageable components, selling anything valuable to dealers who come down from upper levels looking for deals on parts they can resell for profit. It's a dangerous existence where unstable towers of debris collapse without warning, crushing anyone underneath. Toxic runoff pools in low spots, corroding metal and flesh alike. creating zones where nothing can survive for long. Feral droids wander the heaps, their programming corrupted by years without maintenance, attacking anything that moves because their threat recognition subroutines cannot tell friend from foe anymore. Yet communities have formed on level 1782. Scavengers develop territories and hierarchies based on who controls the best salvage spots. The best locations, areas where upper-level contractors regularly dump valuable technology, are claimed by gangs who defend their turf through conflict when necessary. Smaller operators work the margins, hoping to find valuable salvage that will allow them to relocate to a higher level. Children born on level 1782 grow up in salvage communities, learning to recognize valuable salvage before they learn to read or write. This existence is all they know. Life beyond these heaps of garbage remains unimaginable to them, including levels where the ground is solid and buildings stay standing for more than a few years without collapsing. One story tells of a Herglick informant who directed fugitives to hide on level 1782, reasoning correctly that no one would search a literal trash heap for escaped prisoners. He was right. The fugitives disappeared into the scrap heaps and were never found. Moving deeper into the underworld, the levels reveal how far the Republic's control had truly slipped. Level 1671 sits 3,456 levels from the surface, roughly two-thirds of the way down through Coruscant's urban crust. This level's reputation for criminality stretches back to the final years of the Republic, before the Clone Wars began. In 26 BBY, Lieutenant Tanavos Devo of the Coruscant Security Force raided an arms deal here that made his career and nearly ended his life. The target was Zodu Onglo, a Palawan gunrunner with connections across the underworld and enough cunning to have avoided capture for years. Onglo specialized in moving stolen military-grade weapons, selling them to whoever paid his price without caring what they planned to use the blasters for afterward. On that night, he arranged a deal in a warehouse on level 1671, planning to sell a cache of weapons lifted from a Republic armory to buyers who definitely should not have access to military hardware. Devo's intelligence network tipped him off about the transaction. The lieutenant assembled a strike team and moved in as credits were changing hands and the buyers were inspecting their new merchandise. The resulting firefight illuminated 3 blocks in every direction. Onglo's guards opened fire the instant they spotted badges, not waiting for anyone to announce they were under arrest. Devo's team returned fire immediately, pinning the lawbreakers behind cargo containers while calling for backup that might arrive too late to matter. The warehouse itself was a maze of storage crates and dark corners, perfect terrain for an ambush or a last stand. For 20 minutes, blaster bolts crisscrossed the space, sparking off Durasteel support beams and punching through the cheap corrugated metal walls. Then, Devo flanked the defenders through a ventilation shaft no one was watching, coming up behind them through the darkness and catching them completely by surprise. Onglo surrendered when he felt a blaster pressed against the back of his head and realized his situation had become hopeless. Devo's case report describes level 1671 as a hostile zone where standard law enforcement procedures do not apply. Officers operate surrounded by beings who view them as invaders. The report notes that without proper backup and heavy weapons, entering level 1671 results in casualties. This case file reveals how the Republic viewed its own lower levels. Even before the Clone Wars and the Empire's rise, Coruscant had lost control of huge swaths of the underworld, where outlaws operated openly, and law enforcement only intervened when crimes affected upper levels or someone important demanded action. The 1300s contain the levels that define Coruscant's underworld in popular imagination. The 1300s, especially level 1313, define Coruscant's illicit underworld. These levels are well known in the lower city, but largely unknown on the surface, attracting those seeking to operate outside Republic or Imperial law. Level 1313 sits 1,313 levels up from the planetary core, deep enough that Coruscant's polite society forgot it existed centuries ago. During the Clone Wars, most citizens on the upper levels did not know there was a level 1313, as it was not part of their awareness. The Jedi knew about it due to lawbreakers fleeing to these depths, but did not publicize its existence. The level's architecture reveals its age through every crumbling surface. Buildings here date back thousands of years, constructed during Coruscant's early urban expansion when the city still had open ground and natural sky. Structures that were never meant to be buried under 5,000 levels of newer construction, but were instead streets and buildings originally constructed on the surface before being buried. But the city built upward continuously, leaving these old districts in permanent darkness. The buildings lean against each other for support, with foundations settling unevenly. Walkways sag under the weight they were not designed to carry, and mold grows on most surfaces due to moisture and poor ventilation. Ahsoka Tano learned about 1313 the hard way when she had nowhere else to run. Falsely accused of attacking the Jedi Temple in 20 BBY, she fled to the underworld to escape Republic forces who thought she was an extremist. With nowhere else to turn and no one to trust, she descended to 1313, hoping to lose herself in the crowds where Jedi rarely ventured. Gangs controlled the streets and demanded tribute. Every transaction required credits and favors, and finding food meant navigating local loyalties and debts unfamiliar to someone raised in the Jedi Temple. She met the Martez sisters, Trace and Rafa, in a repair shop on 1313, where they struggled to keep a legitimate business running. These two young women had been born on 1313 and never left. They were not lawbreakers by choice, but were simply trying to survive in an environment that punished honest business practices. To them, the Jedi were distant figures who never came to the lower levels. When Ahsoka revealed she was a Jedi, they initially did not believe her. The Martez sisters had their own problems that went beyond poverty. They owed money to a gangster named Pintu Sunel, a Quarren enforcer who controlled several blocks of 1313 through fear and casual cruelty. Sunel ran a protection racket that was anything but protective. Pay him or suffer accidents that would destroy everything you worked for. The sisters could not pay, so their options were brutally simple. Work for Sunel, doing jobs they would hate themselves for, flee Coruscant entirely with nothing but what they could carry, or refuse and perish when his patience ran out. Ahsoka's arrival complicated everything because her presence brought danger that the sisters could not handle. When gangsters from the Pike Syndicate showed up looking for the fugitive Jedi, the Martez sisters got caught in the crossfire that was not their fight. Eventually, Ahsoka and the sisters escaped 1313 together, flying off-world in a cargo ship they barely knew how to pilot. For Ahsoka, it was a temporary stop on a journey toward clearing her name and finding justice. For Trace and Rafa, it was freedom from a life they had been born into and never escaped through any legitimate path. Most beings on 1313 spend their entire lives there without ever reaching the surface levels. According to Legends sources, level 1313 was planned to play an even larger role in Star Wars storytelling. LucasArts announced Star Wars 1313 in 2012 as a video game focusing on Coruscant's illicit underworld, and a live-action TV series titled Star Wars Underworld would have used the same settings. Though both projects were canceled after Disney's acquisition of Lucasfilm, concepts survived in various forms. The Star Wars The Essential Reader's Companion describes Boba Fett investigating underworld networks on 1313 during the Empire's reign, hunting bounties through the lower levels where Imperial law had limited reach. Meanwhile, Dr. Evazan and Ponda Baba, the Cantina thugs who later confronted Luke Skywalker and Mos Eisley, fled through 1313 1 year before A New Hope, pursued by Coruscant police after a botched medical experiment. The level's darkness is not metaphorical. Broken lighting systems leave entire blocks in shadow, lit only by neon signs advertising clubs, cantinas, and less legal enterprises, while moisture drips constantly from overhead pipes, pooling in low spots, and growing fungus that clings to every surface it touches. Fungus grows on most surfaces, thriving on organic material that accumulates in the lower levels. Yet despite everything working against them, life persists. Clubs on 1313 host dancers and musicians, and families raise children in apartments carved into ancient buildings, teaching them to survive in a hostile world that is the only home they will ever know. The levels surrounding 1313 each tell their own stories of survival and betrayal. Level 1312 attracted a different kind of illicit, those who needed to stay hidden rather than operate openly. One level up from 1313, the level shares many characteristics with its infamous neighbor. Dim streets lit by failing glow panels, gang presence on every corner, businesses struggling to stay legitimate in an economy that rewards corruption, but with slightly less chaos moment to moment. That small difference mattered to people looking for a place to hide where they might survive longer than a week. Asajj Ventress lived on 1312 for a time after leaving Count Dooku's service and everything the Sith represented. The former assassin turned bounty hunter needed a base of operations, off the grid, where neither Jedi nor Sith would think to look for someone with her particular skills. The corner of 12th and G on level 1312 fit perfectly for her needs. A numbered intersection in a numbered grid, anonymous and forgotten by anyone who mattered. So, she rented a small apartment, paid in untraceable credits that could not be tracked to their source, and operated from there for months without incident. When Ahsoka Tano fled to the underworld during her fugitive arc, she ended up at the same intersection by pure chance or the Force's guidance. She did not know about Ventress's residence. She needed a public holobooth to make a call, and 12th and G had one that still worked, unlike most of the vandalized equipment scattered across the level. Standing in that booth, surrounded by the noise and chaos that never stopped on 1312, Ahsoka contacted Barriss Offee, not knowing Barriss had betrayed her. The fact that both Ventress and Ahsoka ended up on the same corner tells us something important about the underworld's geography. Safe spaces are rare at this depth. The few locations with working communication equipment or quiet rooms are used repeatedly by different people hiding from different threats. Level 1315, 3 levels up, hosted abandoned warehouses left over from the Republic's earlier industrial era, buildings empty and forgotten by everyone except outlaws who needed space to store contraband away from official eyes, making them perfect for storing illegal goods, evidence of conspiracy, or traps designed to destroy a young Jedi's life and reputation. Barriss Offee chose a mutinous warehouse on 1315 as her base when she turned against the Jedi Order she had once served. The warehouse held crates of nanodroids, banned weapons from the Clone Wars that could slip through security scanners and destroy systems from within buildings that seemed completely safe. Barriss had used these weapons to strike the Jedi Temple, taking lives and destroying property while framing Ahsoka for crimes she did not commit. Now, Barriss hid in the warehouse's depths, planning her next move, while the Jedi searched for evidence that would prove Ahsoka's guilt and justify their rush to judgment. Ahsoka and Ventress tracked her there through investigation and intuition. They had formed an unlikely alliance, the falsely accused Padawan and the notorious assassin, working together because the truth mattered more than their past conflicts. When they reached the warehouse at 1315, they found it brightly lit, with the constant clatter of machinery echoing through the space, with crates stacked 20 feet high, creating a maze where Barriss waited with stolen lightsabers. The confrontation was brief and brutal when it finally came. Barriss ambushed them from above, leaping from a catwalk with lightsabers blazing red, but they were not her lightsabers. She had stolen Ventress's weapons, dual crimson blades that deceived onlookers into believing a Sith was present. Ahsoka and Barriss clashed among the munitions crates, lightsabers carving through metal containers and support beams. Then, Barriss played her final move with ruthless precision. She knocked Ahsoka unconscious with a calculated strike and scattered nanodroid evidence around her unconscious body, creating a scene that looked exactly like an extremist caught with incriminating materials. When clone troopers burst into the warehouse moments later, responding to anonymous tips, they found exactly what they expected: Ahsoka surrounded by incriminating evidence, while Barriss had vanished into the darkness. The arrest on Level 1315 led directly to Ahsoka's trial and expulsion from the Jedi Order. Though she was eventually cleared after the truth emerged, the damage could not be undone. She left the Jedi Order, and the events leading to her departure began in an abandoned warehouse on Level 1315. Level 1315 remained active in Imperial records long after the Clone Wars ended. Security reports note suspicious activity on Level 1315 as a routine entry in daily logs, suggesting illicit operations continued for decades in warehouses that no one bothered to demolish or repurpose for legitimate use. The Clone Wars turned these forgotten levels into stages for personal tragedies that shaped galactic history. Level 1325, 10 levels up from 1315, witnessed another tragedy that the Clone Wars inflicted on those who tried to do the right thing. ARC Trooper CT-5555, known to his brothers as Fives, discovered the truth about Order 66 through investigation and terrible luck. He learned about the inhibitor chips planted in every clone trooper's brain, bioorganic devices designed to turn loyal soldiers into Jedi executioners at Palpatine's command. Fives knew he had to warn someone who could stop the conspiracy, but he needed to find someone he could trust, despite the conspiracy reaching the highest levels of government. He chose Anakin Skywalker and Captain Rex, two beings he believed would listen and act on evidence, even if it implicated the Chancellor himself. Fives arranged a secret meeting on Level 1325, Sector I-9, in a hangar bay far from prying eyes and surveillance systems that reported everything to Palpatine's network. He picked this level deliberately for strategic reasons, deep enough that Senate security would not patrol without a specific reason, but accessible enough that Anakin could reach it without raising suspicion from handlers who watched his movements. In that hangar, Fives presented his evidence about the inhibitor chips and their purpose. He explained the conspiracy to Anakin and Rex, who began to believe his account, despite how impossible it sounded. Then, Coruscant's security burst through the hangar doors, responding to a tip from Palpatine's agents. In the chaos and confusion that followed, a security officer struck Fives. He perished in Rex's arms moments later, attempting to warn them about the Chancellor and the chips, but he failed to convey the full message as he fell, leaving Palpatine's plan unopposed. Fives fell on Level 1325, in a hangar that was unmarked and cleaned by security droids within hours. Even in these depths where tragedy struck daily, the underworld's economy continued operating. Level 1329, 4 levels down from 1325, is home to Uret's Mark, a bar with a well-earned reputation as one of the roughest establishments on one of the roughest levels in Coruscant's underworld. That is a claim on a planet where thousands of levels compete for the title of roughest, but Uret's Mark earned every word through consistent service to the galaxy's underworld element and those who hunted them. During the Age of the Empire, Han Solo and Chewbacca spent a week on Level 1329 looking for work that would pay better than their usual smuggling runs. They had arrived on Coruscant hoping to score a lucrative cargo job through connections in the trade guilds, but legitimate opportunities were scarce for known smugglers whose reputations preceded them. So, they descended to the underworld, where nobody asked questions and deals were sealed with handshakes backed by the implicit threat of conflict if anyone broke their word. Uret's Mark became their base of operations during that week, a place to drink cheap ale, eat cheaper food, and wait for the right job to materialize from the stream of outlaws passing through. The bar served fried Nerf nuggets, greasy, salty, and surprisingly edible despite questionable origins. Chewbacca developed a taste for them that Han could not understand, downing plates of the fried meat between drinks of Corellian ale and watching the crowd for opportunities or threats. Han nursed his own drink slowly, evaluating potential employers and dangers with equal caution, because in places like Uret's Mark, everyone was both. Their week on level 1329 culminated in a meeting with Alinka Alu, an Imperial noblewoman who needed discreet transportation for reasons she would not explain beyond vague references to family business. Han smelled trouble immediately. He always did when jobs came with secrets and nervous clients, but he needed credits badly enough to ignore his instincts. The job went sideways exactly as he'd predicted, but that is a different story. What matters is that level 1329 facilitated connections that could not happen anywhere else in the galaxy. If Alu had tried hiring smugglers through legitimate channels, she would have been reported to Imperial intelligence within hours by informants who sold information for a steady income. But down on level 1329, in a dive bar where everyone was guilty of something, she could make her deal in relative peace. Urat's Mark also featured regular brawls that were not planned entertainment. Spontaneous conflict erupted when someone insulted the wrong being or cheated at sabak against someone who did not accept losing gracefully. Below the 1300s, conditions deteriorate beyond what most beings consider survivable. In these levels, Coruscant's conditions become significantly more hazardous. This threshold is not officially marked, but it is recognized by underworld residents. Above it, the lower levels are dangerous but functional, while below it, infrastructure failures and environmental hazards make the levels largely uninhabitable. The levels down here are so old that their construction predates recorded history by thousands of years. The buildings have deteriorated into ruins that remain unstudied due to dangerous conditions, and systems fail in ways that cannot be repaired because no one remembers how they work or what they were supposed to do. The air itself becomes a hazard, growing thinner and more toxic with each level descended, which is why official records list these levels as uninhabitable due to toxic air, structural instability, and other environmental hazards. Yet legends persist about what exists in the deepest levels. Spacers tell stories around cantina tables about mutant creatures lurking in the perpetual darkness below level 100, while urban explorers share rumors of lost treasures buried in collapsed buildings where no one has walked for 10,000 years. Conspiracy theorists insist that secret Imperial facilities operated in these depths, conducting experiments that could not be allowed on the surface world, where witnesses might ask inconvenient questions. Some of these stories have a basis in fact, though verification is difficult without expeditions into hazardous areas. Most citizens believe they know where Coruscant City ends. They are wrong. Level 5 represents the official floor of habitable Coruscant in most citizens' understanding. Most upper-level residents believe it is the lowest accessible level, and most people never think about the question because they live their entire lives between levels 1000 and 5127, never considering what lies beneath their feet or why it matters. Princess Leia Organa believed level 5 was the bottom, until her friend Amilyn Holdo corrected her during one of their youthful adventures. Young Leia, full of confidence and privilege that came from being raised in palaces, stated with absolute certainty that level 5 was as low as anyone could go. Holdo challenged the assumption, asking where that information came from. Leia's answer, that everyone knew it, revealed the limits of common knowledge even among the galaxy's educated elite. Everyone was wrong about something basic because they had never questioned what they were told, and Holdo delighted in proving it. Level 5 is characterized by deteriorating infrastructure and minimal services. The buildings are utilitarian blocks built during Coruscant's first major expansion thousands of years ago, designed for function over form. They are solid Durasteel and Duraplast construction, built to last for centuries, and they have succeeded far beyond their creators' expectations. People live here out of necessity rather than choice, scraping by in the cheapest housing on the entire planet. The level attracts the desperately poor and those hiding from debts or warrants that would catch up with them on higher levels, where records are checked more carefully. Basic services exist on level 5, but they are unreliable in ways that cost lives when systems fail. Water comes from pipes that should have been replaced centuries ago. Power arrives through junction boxes that spark whenever demand exceeds capacity, and air processing works most of the time, which means sometimes it does not, and residents wake up gasping because the recyclers broke down during the night. Outages happen regularly enough that residents keep emergency supplies and backup plans, knowing they might go days without services that upper-level citizens take completely for granted. The population of Level 5 lives one level above Level 4, which is officially forbidden, and 2 levels above Level 3, which is sealed entirely. The levels below Level 5 exist in official records only as warnings and restricted zones. Young Leia learned that everyone was wrong in the most direct way possible when Amilyn Holdo decided they should explore Level 4 during one of their adventures together. The official records said it was inaccessible, sealed off for safety reasons that no one bothered to explain beyond vague warnings about structural instability. But Holdo took that as a challenge rather than a deterrent, because telling her something could not be done was the surest way to make her do it. She found maintenance shafts that led down into the forbidden level, access tunnels that had not been sealed properly, and weak points in the barriers that kept ordinary citizens from descending. With Leia in tow, reluctant but curious despite her better judgment, Holdo descended into Level 4, carrying nothing but a flashlight and determination to prove something everyone knew was wrong. The level had no functioning lighting systems, so Holdo's flashlight revealed crumbling architecture and thick dust that made breathing difficult, while the structures showed visible signs of settling under the weight of the levels above with unstable floors and ceilings. Despite the hazards, Holdo searched for the museum she had heard about that supposedly contained artifacts from Coruscant's earliest history. She found it tucked into a forgotten corner of Level 4, a building that predated the Republic by thousands of years. It had been a museum once, hosting artifacts from Coruscant's early history when the planet still had oceans and forests and species that were not human. Now, it stood abandoned and sealed for centuries. Display cases held objects that no one alive remembered the purpose of anymore, while sculptures depicted species that might be extinct or might have evolved into something else. Text plaques explained exhibits in languages that required translation software to read, and even then, the meanings came through garbled and uncertain. Holdo and Leia explored the museum's halls, which contained artifacts from civilizations that predated the Republic. The experience demonstrated that Coruscant's construction had buried entire eras of history beneath newer levels. Levels 2 and 3 remained sealed not just for safety, but for secrets the Empire wanted buried. Below Level 4 lie Levels 3 and 2, officially sealed and designated as completely inaccessible to anyone without special authorization, which is almost impossible to obtain. Security barriers block every known entrance with redundant systems, while droids patrol the few maintenance shafts that descend this far, programmed to turn back anyone who tries to enter and report their attempt to authorities. The official reason given in public records is safety. These levels are structurally unsound, prone to collapse, filled with toxic gases that are fatal within minutes, and devoid of anything worth salvaging. The unofficial reason that circulates in conspiracy theories is much darker. The Empire did not want anyone discovering what was down there. Unverified rumors describe secret facilities on Levels 2 and 3 that operated during the Imperial era. Scientific installations where forbidden experiments took place away from oversight committees, detention centers for political prisoners who were too dangerous to execute but too important to release, and archives containing records the Empire wanted destroyed but could not bring itself to delete because information might become useful again. Whether these rumors contain any truth, or whether they are paranoid fantasies, is impossible to verify without breaching the barriers, and no one who has tried has come back with evidence that settles the question. Some beings did enter, despite the barriers and warnings. Urban explorers and treasure hunters risked everything to descend into the sealed zone, driven by curiosity or greed, or the belief that things forbidden must contain something valuable. A few returned with tales of empty corridors and collapsed structures. Nothing exciting, nothing worth the risk they had taken, while others returned disoriented, unable to clearly describe what they had encountered. Some never returned at all and were reported missing, with Coruscant security investigations finding no leads and the cases being filed as lost to unknown causes. The actual conditions on levels 2 and 3 likely consist of collapsed buildings, toxic leaks, industrial runoff, and possibly feral creatures adapted to the darkness. The lack of verified information has allowed speculation to persist. At the very bottom lies the foundation upon which 25,000 years of civilization were built. Level 1 was the first artificial platform ever built on Coruscant, and now it would end anyone who tried to breathe its air. Constructed over 100,000 years ago, when the planet still had open ground, natural sky, and species living without needing to recycle their air through filtration systems, early settlers, whose names are lost to time, built this level as the foundation for everything that would come after, making decisions that would shape galactic civilization in ways they could never have predicted. They laid down durasteel beams kilometers long and poured duraplast foundations strong enough to support entire city blocks, creating a platform that could hold buildings, streets, and populations measured in millions without collapsing under its own weight. Construction continued upward for 100,000 years as the population grew and available surface area filled. By the time of the Galactic Republic, construction had buried Level 1 under 5,126 additional levels of construction. No natural light reached it anymore, and no fresh air circulated through its ancient corridors. The structures that made up Level 1 had endured for millennia beyond their design parameters, held together by construction methods that are no longer fully understood. Most had collapsed eventually, or been deliberately demolished to make room for supports needed by the levels above. What remained was a wasteland of ancient ruins, more archaeological site than functioning city, preserved only because removing it was more trouble than leaving it alone. The official designation for Level 1 in modern records is uninhabitable, and this time there is no ambiguity about what that means. Multiple surveys over the centuries confirmed that oxygen levels are insufficient to support most forms of life, with the air being a toxic mixture of chemicals leached from decaying construction materials and industrial waste that filtered down over 100,000 years of urban existence. Radiation levels exceeded safe limits because of ancient power systems that were never properly decommissioned, making exploration dangerous even with full environmental suits. Without protection, exposure proves fatal within minutes. Yet Level 1 fascinates scholars who study Coruscant's transformation from planet to ecumenopolis. It represents the beginning of the project covering an entire world and cities, and in the ruins are clues to who the original builders were and why they started this process that consumed everything natural. Beneath Level 1 lies Coruscant's original planetary surface. Level 0 is exactly what the name suggests, the ground level of Coruscant, the planet's original surface, now buried beyond any reasonable hope of reaching it again. This is the original planetary surface where life first evolved billions of years ago. Ancient oceans, shores, and mountains once existed here before construction filled and leveled them. All natural features have been erased, and only archaeological surveys and deep core samples can verify that they ever existed. According to fragmentary records from early surveys, Level 0 receives no illumination from above through 5,000 levels of construction. The only light sources are bioluminescent fungi and chemical reactions in pools of toxic waste, while the temperature remains cold due to the absence of sunlight and the thermal properties of rock that has not been warmed in over 100,000 years. Water exists only as seepage through cracks, contaminated with heavy metals and pollutants. The environment is classified as actively hostile to life. Coruscant is classified as an ecumenopolis, a planet entirely covered by a city. The original planetary surface at Level 0 has been buried under artificial construction for over 100,000 years. One persistent myth claims that mutated creatures live below level 100, things that evolved in the darkness over thousands of years and have never seen light in their entire evolutionary history. These creatures supposedly hunt by sound and smell alone, preying on explorers who descend too far.
A map like that shows where every level sits, but not why the same people always end up trapped at the bottom. That has less to do with construction than with appetite. A planet-sized city has to be fed, and everything a trillion beings use eventually has to go somewhere. Coruscant has a secret it cannot hide, only bury. Thousands of cargo ships arrive and depart without pause, and entire hyperspace lanes exist solely to keep Coruscant fed. The planet sits at the crossroads of major trade routes, and that position is not a coincidence. It is a survival requirement. As the Essential Atlas confirms, Coruscant's place at the intersection of the galaxy's busiest shipping corridors is what makes its existence possible. Without those supply lines, the capital of the galaxy would face severe shortages in a matter of weeks. But when a trillion beings consume resources every day, those resources produce waste every day. And on a planet with no countryside, no empty land, and no elsewhere to send it to, there is only one direction the waste can go: down. Organic waste, industrial waste, atmospheric pollution, broken technology, tainted water. On most planets, waste can be spread across the land, with factories in one region, dumps in another, and farms in a third. Coruscant cannot do this. It is one continuous city covering one entire planet. The only direction available is down. This is why the lower levels become what they are. They are the digestive tract of a planet-sized body. Every waste product, every broken machine, every spent fuel cell and tainted water flow and discarded droid frame, all of it sinks downward, and the people who live down there live inside that waste stream. Water is the clearest example of what that means in practice, because every living thing needs it, and because its journey downward is impossible to misread. And what happens to that water on the way down tells you exactly who this city was built for. Water almost certainly arrives on Coruscant in bulk freighters from water-rich worlds across the galaxy. These ships dock at upper-level cargo ports where the water is processed and fed into the planetary supply grid. At this stage, it is clean, safe, and treated as a product bought, sold, and distributed according to market forces and government contracts. On the top levels, water flows through high-quality pipes into government buildings, luxury homes, restaurants, parks, and public fountains. A senator can pour a glass of water without a single thought about where it came from or what it cost. On the top levels, water is used generously. Decorative fountains run day and night. Climate control consumes enormous amounts every hour. It becomes wastewater, carrying heat, chemicals, organic matter, and the leftover traces of a trillion daily activities. On the upper levels, the recyclers that process this are modern, well-maintained, and effective. They pull clean water from the waste stream and feed it back into the supply. The remaining waste, concentrated sludge, chemical leftovers, and heat pollution, is pushed downward into the levels below. The mid-levels receive this waste stream and run it through their own recyclers, but these are older and less effective. Maintenance money is directed to the upper levels first, and the mid-levels get what is left. The output is lower quality. People living on the mid-levels drink water that has been recycled multiple times. It is technically safe. It meets Republic standards, or it did when those standards were last checked, which may have been years ago. It tastes different from what flows on the upper levels, carrying a faint sharpness that people get used to because they have no other choice. But below the mid-levels, even that faint standard disappears entirely. Below the mid-levels, the recyclers become increasingly patched together. Some levels have working units that were installed decades or centuries ago and have been maintained by local workers without official support. Some levels have units built from scrap parts that barely function, and some levels have no recycling at all. They depend on what drips, leaks, or can be stolen from the pipes passing through on their way to even deeper zones. At the deepest inhibited levels, standing pools of dirty liquid gather in low points in the structure. These are not lakes, they are waste pools, the final stop at the bottom of a planet-wide drainage path. In the most desperate conditions shown across Star Wars fiction, people have no choice but to use them. The water that arrives clean on Coruscant does not disappear. It breaks down, one level at a time, one recycling pass at a time, until it reaches the bottom as something barely drinkable. And the only difference between the glass a senator drinks and the water a family deep below risks illness to consume is how many levels of the machine it has passed through. Water is not the only resource that makes this trip. Energy arrives through reactors and imported fuel. But the deeper you go, the less reliable the power becomes. Upper levels receive priority power that is stable and uninterrupted. Mid-levels get secondary power that is generally reliable but prone to drops during high demand. The deepest levels may have no power grid connection at all. Power comes from scrap generators, tapped lines, or nothing. In some depictions, people have been born, lived, and died without ever seeing light brighter than a glow rod. They navigate by memory, by touch, and by the faint glow of organisms that adapted to the permanent dark. No power means no climate control, no reliable lighting, and no powered medical equipment, which means injuries that would be routine up top become life-threatening below. Food follows the same downward path. Fresh food arrives from farming worlds and is expensive, available mainly on the upper levels. The mid-levels rely on processed food, artificial rations, and crops grown in farming units that receive less light, less water, and less money than their upper-level counterparts. The deepest levels depend on what filters down: expired rations, discarded food from upper-level markets, and whatever can be grown in makeshift setups using scrap grow lights and recycled water. The deepest levels may rely on fungal growths, vermin that thrive without light, and food sources of uncertain quality. The lower levels do not receive their own supply chain. They receive what is left over. Then there's air. Up top, air is processed by scrubbers, clean, temperature controlled, and constantly refreshed. With every level you descend, air quality drops. The scrubbers below are older, less maintained, and less effective. Industrial fumes from zones like the works build up, and waste gases settle and thicken. On the lower levels, the air has a character. It carries a smell, a taste, and a weight that sits in your lungs and coats every open surface. Long-term exposure to these conditions shorten lives in ways that people up top never have to consider. On the deepest levels, pockets of toxic gas build up in closed spaces, and some residents carry personal breathing filters, not by choice, but because without them, they would suffocate. The lower levels themselves are divided into a series of working zones, each with a specific role. The first is the industrial and service levels. These are the maintenance hallways, transit tunnels, power routing stations, and repair bays just below the gleaming upper city. This is where the actual work happens. The people who live on these levels, the ones who cannot afford to travel back up, are the permanent maintenance class. They live inside the machine. Below even the service workers, though, the city reveals what it truly does with the things it no longer needs. Below the service levels are the waste economies. This is where the city's discarded material, broken droids, spent fuel cells, damaged ship parts, and outdated technology piles up and is given new life. Salvage crews pick through the refuse for anything of value, often working in conditions that would shut down a regulated shop up top, breathing fumes from corroded metal and handling parts that leak chemicals no one has tested. Parts dealers sell pieces that still work but were thrown out because something newer was available. This is not simply a crime, it is an economy, a functioning market with its own supply chains, prices, and workers, built because the upper city produces waste in amounts that create opportunity for those willing to work in dangerous conditions. Below the waste economies are neighborhoods that still function but receive no attention from anyone in power. People live near heavy equipment because the closeness makes housing cheap. Power is tapped from nearby lines, and air quality depends on closeness to processors that may or may not be working. These neighborhoods have names, families, and histories. They're not the underworld in any dramatic sense. They're where people live because they have no other option. And below everything else are the truly abandoned levels, the deepest zones where everything has failed and the city has effectively been closed off. These levels may not have working power, breathable air, or passable corridors. The structures are ancient, thousands of years old in some cases, and have been built over so many times that the original buildings cannot be recognized. Strange things survive here. rogue droids run on broken programs, creatures have adapted to total darkness, and pockets of toxic air can end lives without warning. These are the dead levels, an entire hidden world beneath the world. One location captures the reality of Coruscant's inner workings better than any other. The Works is a vast industrial district that was once the manufacturing heart of the planet. When production moved off-world or became automated, the Works fell into decay. It was not torn down or reused, it was abandoned, left to rot in its own wastes while the city grew over and around it. By the time of the Clone Wars, as shown in the animated series, the Works was neglected and unwelcoming, home only to those with nowhere else to go and those who needed to disappear. It became useful for secret Sith meetings precisely because the Republic had abandoned it so completely that it was entirely out of sight. The Works is the city's inner workings made solid, the industrial zone that once powered everything, now decaying inside of it, covered by the very civilization it helped build. But the upper city does not just take the labor and waste from below, it also takes something far more uncomfortable: entertainment. Beyond waste, the city's workings also produce something less obvious: entertainment built on other people's misery. The Outlander Club, a venue in a lower-level district shown in Attack of the Clones, drew a mixed crowd of gamblers, bounty hunters, and well-to-do citizens looking for excitement. The upper levels did not just take labor and equipment from below, they took thrills. Wealthy citizens descended to consume the danger of the deepest levels as recreation, spent their credits in places that profited from the very conditions they helped create, and then returned to their clean towers without a second thought. The money they spent did not lift anyone out. It stayed in the pockets of the people who ran those establishments, and the next night, new visitors came looking for the same rush. The underlevels are not a flaw of Coruscant. They're the feature that makes Coruscant possible. That answer has nothing to do with physics. The Republic claims every citizen is equal, but on Coruscant, your future is decided before you take your first breath. Coruscant's inequality is not simply rich on top, poor on the bottom. The planet is built on inequality. It is a vertical sorting machine where your altitude decides your access to clean air, natural light, real employment, healthcare, emergency services, policing that protects rather than targets, and any say in how the government runs. As shown across the Clone Wars, multiple novels, and reference material like complete locations, the lower levels are a shadowed underworld far removed from the gleaming towers above. Height matters. The higher you live, the better your conditions. The lower you live, the worse they get. But stating that height matters does not explain how it works in practice. The forces that keep people locked at their assigned altitude, one generation after the next, even in a democracy that claims to represent them all, can be named. There are 5 of them. They work less like walls and more like gates, each one holding up the other until the entire arrangement runs on its own. None of these gates are locked with a key, all of them are nearly impossible to open. Start with the most obvious one: physical infrastructure. On Coruscant, moving up or down requires technology: turbolifts, air taxis, speeder lanes, and public transit. These are not spread evenly. Upper levels have plenty of well-maintained transit options. Mid-levels have fewer. Lower levels may have turbolifts that are broken, controlled by local power brokers, or simply missing entirely. To move between levels, residents may have to crawl through maintenance shafts, ride cargo lifts meant for equipment rather than people, or cross gaps in the structure where walkways have collapsed and never been repaired. And the consequences of that broken infrastructure go much further than inconvenience. The turbolift is not transportation, it is permission. If you cannot get on a lift, you cannot leave your level. And if you cannot leave your level, you cannot reach anything above it. Not work, not healthcare, not government services, not justice. Everything the Republic offers its citizens exists on the upper levels, and the only way to reach those upper levels is through infrastructure that nobody is bothered to maintain below. Picture a resident from deep below who has managed to get work on a mid-level maintenance crew. Every day they wake up in a cramped home 300 levels below their workplace. They walk to the nearest working turbolift, which is 4 hallways away, and the route changes based on which hallways are passable that week. The turbo lift takes them up 200 levels, and then they switch to another lift run by a local transport crew that charges a fee. That gets them another 50 levels. The last 50 levels they climb on foot through maintenance shafts because the upper lifts require a transit pass they cannot afford. The trip takes 2 hours each way, 4 hours a day spent moving vertically through a city that treats vertical movement as a privilege, not a right. Their co-worker on the mid-levels doing the same job lives 20 minutes from work. The worker from below earns the same wage but spends twice as much time getting there. And if the turbo lift breaks, if the transport crew raises their fee, if a hallway is closed for security reasons, they do not get to work. They do not get paid, and they slide one step closer to losing the job entirely. That is not poverty. That is a trap built into the walls. But broken transit is only the first gate. The second one is quieter and in some ways more effective. Paperwork. Even quieter than broken turbo lifts, paperwork is just as effective at keeping people locked in place. To live and work on Coruscant's upper levels, you need documents. Identity records, residency permits, and work approvals. These are issued by the Republic's offices that operate from the upper levels. People born far below may never have been officially registered at all. Without a birth record, getting identity documents becomes very hard. People who have built up debts, warrants, or other legal problems may find their documents flagged or cancelled. They become trapped in a legal shadow, technically present on Coruscant, but invisible to the government that is supposed to serve them. Picture a mother from the deep levels who wants to register her child's birth. The nearest Republic Records office is 60 levels up. She has never been that high. She does not have a transit pass. She does not have identity documents of her own, because her parents never registered her, because their parents never registered them. She is 3 generations removed from official existence. She could pay a forger to create documents, but forged documents cost money she does not have. And if the forgery is caught, she faces charges, which would make her even less likely to ever get real papers. So the child goes unregistered. Then there's money, and on Coruscant, money does not just buy comfort, it buys altitude. Living on higher levels costs more. Housing prices increase with altitude, not steadily but sharply. The top levels are impossibly expensive. The mid-levels are merely very expensive, and the lower levels are where you live if you cannot afford anything else. Jobs up top require credentials, connections, and documents that people from below are unlikely to have. The informal economy of the lower levels, built around salvage, repair, and small-scale trade, earns enough to survive, but not enough to buy passage upward. What makes this worse than ordinary poverty is that the city is also sorted by species, and that sorting is never written down anywhere. The galaxy is rich, and resources exist in plenty. The true horror of Coruscant is not that people are poor, it is that they're poor and cannot move. A poor person who can move can look for opportunity. A poor person who cannot move can only endure. That is the difference between poverty and being trapped. Prejudice makes it worse. Certain non-human species appear far more often in the lower levels. Not because they chose to live there, but because upper-level housing, jobs, and social life work against them. The Legends novel Jedi Twilight by Michael Reeves shows this directly, depicting how the lower levels became tied to specific species in the minds of those above, and how that link hardened into lasting unfairness. A non-human from below who manages to reach the upper levels may find themselves treated with suspicion, disrespect, or fear, not because of anything they've done, but because of where they came from and what they look like. This prejudice is not written in any Republic law. There's no rule saying certain species cannot live above a certain level, but the result is the same as if there were. Most importantly, there is the gate that makes all the others possible. The fact that the people who need help most have no voice at all. The Republic is a democracy, and in theory, every citizen has a say. In practice, Coruscant's lower-level residents are shut out for several connected reasons. They may not be registered voters, their districts, if they have districts, may be drawn to weaken their voice. Senators represent planets, not altitudes. The senator from Coruscant represents the entire planet, but the people who have access to that senator's office live on the top levels. Media attention focuses there too. Laws are made there. The lower levels are talked about only when a crisis forces brief attention, and even then, the attention fades as quickly as it came. Together, these 5 gates do not just disadvantage people, they lock entire generations into a cycle that runs without anyone having to maintain it. A democracy can ignore what it literally cannot see, and on Coruscant, the Republic has built a city that makes its poorest citizens physically out of reach. The distance between a senator's office and a home on level 1313, situated 1,313 levels from the planet's core, might be only a few kilometers straight down. In terms of political power, it's an infinite distance. These 5 gates do not work alone. They form a cycle. You're born on a lower level because your parents live there. Your birth may not be registered because the records office is too far away, and your parents have no documents. Without documents, you cannot attend upper-level schools, use upper-level healthcare, or apply for upper-level work. You learn skills suited to the economy around you: salvage, repair, and informal trade. These skills have value below, but are not recognized above. You have no political voice because you're not a registered voter. You cannot reach your representative's office, and news coverage of your area does not exist. You adapt to local power structures, paying for protection, using unofficial lenders, and relying on smugglers for goods that cannot reach you through official channels. And if you have children, the cycle begins again. Over generations, entire communities become locked into this, not because of personal failure, but because of how everything was built. The gates do not need guards, they run on their own, powered by the same neglect that created them. The Martez sisters' anger towards the Jedi is not abstract, it is rooted in a specific event. During a pursuit connected to the underworld figure Zira the Hutt, Jedi chased their targets down to the lower levels. In the chaos that followed, a crashing transport was diverted away from a crowded landing platform and into the Martez family's home. The sisters' parents rushed to get their children out and were killed in the impact. Afterward, a Jedi came to the orphaned children. She did not offer shelter. She did not arrange for their care. She did not connect them with Republic services. She told 2 children who had just lost everything that the Force would be with them, and then she left. That is what distance from an institution looks like when it kneels down to your level and still cannot see you. Years later, when Ahsoka Tano arrived in the lower levels after leaving the Jedi Order, she met the Martez sisters without knowing any of this history. What she found was a point of view she had never encountered inside the Jedi Temple. Trace made it clear that from where she stood, the Jedi started conflicts, policed people, and did not bother to help those living below. She pointed out that the air on the upper levels was cleaner, a physical marker of the vertical divide that even the atmosphere could not hide. It was the first time a former Jedi had heard how ordinary people saw the institution she had given her life to. When Ahsoka's identity as a former Jedi was eventually revealed, Rafa delivered a judgment that said everything. She told Ahsoka that she was not like the Jedi they had grown up resenting. Ahsoka had acted the way the Jedi should have always acted, with personal kindness and real help, without abandoning the people she had come to know. The Order, by contrast, operated from a distance, and distance on Coruscant is measured in altitude. In the Legends novel Jedi Twilight by Michael Reeves, the vertical divide is painted in even sharper terms, showing a world where even the weather was controlled for the comfort of those who had already had everything. The novel establishes that in the lower levels of Coruscant, seeing sunlight is a rare thing. The people of the upper towers, the decorative and gleaming skyscrapers stretching 2 kilometers high, took sunlight for granted. A Legends-era program called WeatherNet guaranteed that it never rained on the top levels until dusk or later. Even the sky was managed for upper-level comfort. The lower levels existed below a permanent smog layer that WeatherNet did not touch. Rain, when it came, arrived filtered through that smog, carrying chemicals and grime from the air above. The people below had no say in how the weather was managed, and no access to the clean skies the program created for those above them. Canon supports the broader picture of upper-level privilege and lower-level neglect, but this specific weather control detail comes from Legends. The novel also names specific lower-level districts, giving the geography real weight. The Black Pit slums, the Crimson Corridor, the Southern Underground, the Factory District, and the Works. These are not abstract zones on a map. These are neighborhoods with identities and reputations, places where people are born and where people grow old. The Crimson Corridor is particularly telling. The upper levels call it by its official sector number, a string of digits on an administrative chart. The people below called it the Crimson Corridor. The same place has two names depending on which altitude you view it from, and the name you use says everything about which world you belong to. The Legends novel Shadowhunter by Michael Reeves adds another layer of proof for how separated these two worlds truly are. Its second half is a chase through Coruscant's lower levels, described as a maze of alleyways and tunnels with no clear maps. Finding your way depends entirely on local knowledge. A person from the top levels would be as lost down there as a person from below would be in the Senate district, except the person from below would at least be able to breathe. The most unsettling detail from Shadowhunter, though, is not about buildings or geography, it's about silence. Darth Maul cut his way through the lower levels over the course of the novel's events, striking down a Neimoidian, multiple Black Sun operatives, a Jedi Padawan, and a Jedi Master, a Sith Lord on a killing spree, and the Upper City never noticed. None of it reached the Jedi Council until it was too late. Bodies fell in hallways that no one in power walked through. Fights broke out in corridors that no sensor tracked. The Council sat in their chamber at the top of their tower, reaching out through the Force for disturbances across the galaxy, and missed a massacre happening directly beneath them. What happens below stays below, unless someone with power decides otherwise. The people of the lower levels are not suffering because there's no food in the galaxy. They're enduring because the paths that distribute food, water, power, and opportunity are built to serve those above. The lower levels are not a place without resources, they're a place where delivery has failed, and that failure feeds on itself, one generation after the next, while the upper city looks the other way. The Republic has never once treated that failure as a crisis. It has treated it as a fact of life, the same way you might treat bad weather on a planet where you control the weather. The Republic prides itself on democracy. The Senate debates policy for the galaxy, but the Senate sits on Coruscant's top level, in a building designed to impress, surrounded by the wealthiest district on the wealthiest planet in the galaxy. The people who need the Republic most are the people the Republic can reach least. When a government refuses to govern below, someone else always will. The lower levels are called lawless, and that word does more work for the Republic than almost any other in its vocabulary. It implies chaos, danger, and a population beyond saving, which is a very convenient story for a government that stops showing up. But it hides something important. The lower levels are not lacking order, they are full of it. It is simply not the Republic's order. In the space left by the government's retreat, unofficial groups have filled every role that a state is supposed to fill: settling disputes, lending money, providing jobs, running supply chains, offering protection, and setting rules people can count on. The lower levels are not a place where no one is in charge. They're a place where the wrong people are in charge because the right people left. The very structure of Republic law enforcement on Coruscant proves this. The planet maintains a separate police presence for the lower levels, known as the Coruscant Underworld Police, a dedicated force tasked with keeping some basic level of order in the underworld. The existence of a separate force tells you something important before you learn anything else about it. The Underworld Police Force operates in a gray zone, sometimes enforcing Republic law, sometimes enforcing local deals, sometimes simply trying to survive their shifts. They exist so the Republic can say it polices the lower levels, but what they can actually do falls far short of what needs to be done, and everything that falls into that gap is where the real story begins. The organizations that control the underlevels are not random groups looking for trouble. They provide specific services, and those services line up directly with what a working government would provide. The difference is that nobody voted for them. Of all those services, the most revealing is the one that feels the most like government protection. The most basic is protection. When there are no reliable police, someone will offer to keep you safe for a price. Protection sellers control territory and keep harm away from the people within it, as long as those people pay. They are not always harsh towards the people they protect. They are harsh towards threats to their territory, including rival operations, outside groups, and anyone who challenges their authority. The moral difference between a protection racket and a tax-funded police force is real, but the way they work day to day is closer than comfortable people would like to admit. Protection is not a gift on the lower levels. It is a product, and if you cannot afford it, you're on your own. Of all the organizations filling these roles, the Pike Syndicate is the clearest example of how a criminal operation becomes essential infrastructure. The Pikes are not simply spice dealers, they're a supply chain. Their power comes from controlling how goods move through Coruscant's lower levels, through maintenance hallways, abandoned levels, shut down transit paths, and bribe checkpoints. When you control the flow of things people need to survive, you control the people who need them. The Clone Wars arc involving the Martez sisters shows this in practice. Rafa and Trace were not eager participants in the spice trade. They were drawn into it by debt and by the simple reality that honest work on the lower levels paid less than the risk of illegal work. The Pikes offered them a deal: move this cargo, and the debt would be cleared. The deal was a trap, but it was a trap that only worked because the sisters had no honest way out. They cannot go to the police because the police either could not or would not help. Their only choices were to serve the people they owed or to run. And running on Coruscant's lower levels meant running to another boss's territory where the same rules applied, and even if the job went perfectly, the next debt would come soon enough, because life below always costs more than it pays. Debt on the lower levels is not a number, it is a leash, and the people holding the other end are the only ones offering work. Beyond physical control of goods, there is a second kind of power that is even harder to escape: the control of information. Knowledge may be even more valuable than moving cargo. On the lower levels, knowing which hallways are safe this week, which lifts are working, where the Republic patrols are, who is looking for you, and who's willing to pay for your skills, all of this decides who survives and who does not. Information sellers trade in rumors, intelligence about Republic operations, and inside knowledge of Syndicate activity. The brokers who trade in this knowledge are not neutral watchers, they're power players who decide who gets warned and who gets ambushed. The Legends novel Shadowhunter by Michael Reeves is built around this idea. Its central figure, Lauren Pavan, is an informant broker operating in Coruscant's lower levels. But before he was a broker, he was a father. Pavan worked at the Jedi Temple not as a Jedi, but as support staff. He had a son, Jax. When Jax was identified as Force sensitive, the Order took him. The Jedi demanded total separation, no contact between father and son, no visits, and no messages. Lauren was told this was how it had to be, and then he was pushed out of the temple with nothing. He lost his child to an institution that called the loss necessary, then lost his job because he was too close to the child they took, and then lost his home because it was connected to the job. On Coruscant, failing is not a figure of speech, it is literal. He dropped through the levels one by one, until he landed somewhere the people who took his son never looked. Lauren Pavan landed in the lower levels and became an information broker because it was the one skill he had left: knowing things, watching things, and understanding how power moved. He sold knowledge to survive and partnered with a modified droid, I-5YQ, who had been rebuilt with combat abilities and something close to genuine emotional responses. The droid was more than a tool. It was the closest thing Lauren had to a companion in a place where trust was rare and friendships came with a price. In the lower levels, modifications like these were common. Another example of how lower level technology operated outside official rules. Droids down there were rebuilt to do things their manufacturers never intended, because official parts and official service were luxuries nobody could afford. Lauren Pavan did not choose the underworld, the Jedi chose it for him. And what Pavan discovered in those corridors was not just survival intelligence, it was information that could have changed the fate of the entire galaxy. And the stakes of that underworld information trade could shake the entire galaxy. During the events of Shadowhunter, Pavan acquired a holocron containing Darth Sidious's plans for the Naboo blockade from a Nemoidian defector. The deal took place entirely in the lower levels, outside Republic detection. Intelligence of galactic importance was being traded below, while the Senate talked above, completely unaware. The information that could have prevented the Naboo crisis, that could have exposed the Sith years before they struck, passed through the hands of a discarded father in a forgotten hallway, and nobody up top ever knew. This is a Legends depiction, but canon supports the broader idea that the underlevels run by their own standards, with their own tools, and their own sense of what matters. Finally, there are the access sellers, the forgers and fixers who provide fake identity documents, permits, entry passes, and other paperwork that allows lower-level residents to use upper-level services. A forged identity card does not just let you pass a checkpoint, it lets you apply for work, use healthcare, send your children to school, and deal with the Republic's offices as though you actually exist in their records. It is, in a practical sense, the most valuable thing someone from below can buy. The irony is sharp. The Republic built a wall of paperwork between the lower levels and the upper city, and then left people no choice but to forge their way through it. Sitting where all of these roles meet, Black Sun ties the entire underworld together. Where the Pikes control physical movement, Black Sun's influence reaches into information and access to official channels. On Coruscant, Black Sun's network extends into Republic offices through informants and back-channel deals, connecting legal businesses with underground operations and providing forged documents, bribed officials, and connections to upper-level services to anyone who can pay. Black Sun's clients are not just outlaws. They include desperate lower-level residents who need papers, mid-level business owners who need to move goods without Republic fees, and upper-level figures who need things done that cannot be done through official channels. Black Sun is the connecting thread between the visible and invisible economies of Coruscant, and that position makes the organization almost impossible to take apart because doing so would cut connections that people up top depend on. What Black Sun reveals more than anything else is that the divide between the upper city and the lower levels was never as clean as the Republic pretended. Shadowhunter supports this picture directly. In the novel, the Jedi sent a Padawan, Darsha Asant, into the lower levels to try to retrieve a Black Sun defector as part of a trial mission. The assignment itself told a story. The Jedi treated the lower levels as a testing ground, a place to send young students to prove themselves. It was considered dangerous enough to count as a real test, but not important enough to send a full knight. The fact that the Jedi wanted intelligence on Black Sun's inner workings, rather than trying to take the organization apart, says everything about how the Republic related to the underground below, not as a threat to be removed, but as a fact on the ground to be watched from a distance. Comparing the two kinds of order that exist on Coruscant reveals exactly why people put up with Syndicate rule. Republic order is based on ideals, democracy, justice, and representation. It is run through paperwork, laws, rules, and offices, and it operates at a distance because the Senate is far away, decisions take time, and enforcement is uneven. Underlevel order is different in every way. It is based on personal relationships, run through face-to-face dealings, and it operates locally. The power broker is on your level, in your hallway, available now. Picture a mechanic on the lower levels whose shop is broken into. She knows who did it. Everyone in her corridor knows who did it. She has two choices. She can try to report the break-in to the Republic. That means finding a working communication terminal, reaching the underworld police, and waiting for a response that may take days. She would need to explain the situation to an officer who does not know her corridor, does not know the thief, and has 50 other cases from 50 other corridors. If she's lucky, the officer files a report. If she is very lucky, something happens months later. Meanwhile, the thief still leaves 3 doors down. Or she can walk to the local syndicate lieutenant and explain what happened. The lieutenant knows her. The lieutenant knows the thief. By the end of the day, her tools are returned and the thief understands that taking from protected businesses has consequences. Next week, a pipe bursts in the lieutenant's quarters, and the mechanic fixes it at no charge. That is the relationship now. Not friendship, not loyalty, but exchange. She did not choose syndicate justice because she admires outlaws. She chose it because it was the only justice that actually arrived. And what happens when the Republic leaves an entire corridor without any law at all makes that choice feel less like a decision and more like survival. When the choice is between a government that promises everything and delivers nothing, and a local boss who promises nothing but delivers results, people choose the boss, not because they want to, but because they have to. None of this is really about lawbreaking. It is about structure. The Republic knows the lower levels exist. It knows people live there. It knows those people need governance. And by choosing not to provide it, the Republic creates the empty space that these organizations fill. The syndicates are not invaders, they're replacements, and the Republic allows them because the other option, actually governing the lower levels, would be expensive, difficult, and politically thankless. But none of this means the lower levels are a simple story. The syndicates that fill the Republic's absence are not kind. Pikes traffic in spice, Black Sun deals in force and pressure, the people below did not choose these rulers. They got them by default, and some Republic efforts did exist. The underworld police were real, even if they were always outmatched. The failure was never total neglect. It was a reach that was never built to extend far enough. Individual movement upward does happen, and not every resident below is permanently trapped. This chapter's argument is about larger tendencies, not rules that never bend. Yet the Republic's most damaging tendency is not what it refuses to give the lower levels, but what it quietly takes from them. The Empire did not invent its tools of control from nothing. It inherited them, already tested and quietly refined, from the lowest levels of its own capital. The underlevels of Coruscant are not just neglected, they are used. Based on what Canon and Legends sources show, the lower levels serve as a testing ground for heavy-handed control monitoring, selective enforcement, controlled transit, informant networks, and population management through fear. Harsh regimes do not arrive everywhere at once. They start where resistance is weakest and visibility is lowest. The lower levels are where the Republic began learning to become the Empire, not through a single dramatic change, but through decades of small steps that nobody up top noticed or cared about. There is a term that fits what the lower levels become, a place that carries the cost so somewhere else does not have to. In real-world research, communities near factories or waste sites that bear unfair health and safety risks so that other communities can enjoy what those facilities produce are described this way. Coruscant's lower levels fit exactly. They carry the environmental costs through pollution, waste, and failed equipment. They carry the economic costs through informal labor and exploitation, and they carry the political costs by serving as a testing ground for oppressive methods, so that the upper levels can keep their way of life without facing what it requires. These zones are not accidents. They're created by deliberate policy choices, or more often by deliberate policy gaps. The decision not to provide services, not to enforce rules, not to invest in upkeep, that itself is a policy. The Republic choosing not to govern the lower levels is itself a form of governance, and abandoned zones become available for use by whoever has the power and the will to use them. The process by which a democracy quietly becomes something else follows a very specific sequence, and Coruscant ran through every step of it. The process follows a specific sequence, and each step makes the next one easier. First, spending on lower-level policing and social services is cut. This is not dramatic, it is gradual, carried out through budget reductions, delayed repairs, and reassigned workers. Over decades, the lower levels go from undeserved to unserved. Second, the upper levels builds a story about the lower levels. They're dangerous, they're beyond saving. This story excuses the pullback and creates fear that justifies tighter security. Third, instead of schools, hospitals, and investment, the lower levels receive police sweeps, checkpoints, and monitoring. Fourth, because the lower levels are already outside normal political oversight, security forces can try things there that would never be approved up top. Harsher methods, mass monitoring, and controlled choke points are tested below, improved below, and when they prove effective, gradually pushed upward to be used on larger populations who never saw them coming. No event in the Star Wars canon shows this sequence more clearly than the Jedi Temple bombing arc in the Clone Wars. The arc begins with an explosive device detonated in the Jedi Temple hangar. Clone troopers and Jedi maintenance workers are killed. The event creates panic and demand for a tighter security response. Not because the Jedi face outside danger, which they face constantly, but because the threat is internal. Something inside did this. The Republic's response is immediate and extreme. Lock down the temple, bring in investigators, demand answers. The speed and force of that response stands in sharp contrast to the Republic's usual lack of concern for loss of life in the lower levels. When an explosion goes off near the Senate, the full machinery of the state moves. When people die from falling equipment on level 1313, it does not make the news. The double standard is not a flaw, it is the design working as intended. But the real cost of that response is not paid in the Senate chamber. It is paid by the families living in corridors that the Republic only visits when it is hunting someone. Ahsoka Tano is framed for the bombing. Evidence points to her. She is arrested and she runs. Her escape takes her into the lower levels. And this matters. A Jedi, a member of the most privileged institution in the Republic, finds that the only place she can escape the Republic's reach is below, in the very zones the Republic has walked away from. The Republic's pursuit is aggressive. Clone troopers and Jedi hunters descend into the lower levels with the full authority of the state. But they're not there to protect anyone living there, they're there to hunt a target. Hallways are closed off, residents are questioned, and homes are searched. Families who have never seen a Republic official in their corridor suddenly have armed soldiers standing in their doorways, demanding answers about a fugitive they have never met. The people being searched have done nothing wrong, they simply live in the wrong place, at the wrong time, in the zone where the Republic only appears when it wants something. This is what state power looks like when it enters a place it abandoned long ago. Not as a protector, but as a hunter. The pursuit grows more intense as Ahsoka moves through the underworld's hidden spaces. Ventress, a former dark-side operative, offers to help Ahsoka for a price. In the lower levels, even enemies become temporary allies because the official authorities are the bigger threat. The people living there are caught in the crossfire of a struggle that is fundamentally about upper-level politics. The temple bombing is a political event, not a lower-level event, but the lower levels pay the cost of the response. Ultimately, Ahsoka is captured and tried before a Republic court, and the outcome reveals how things truly work. The real perpetrator, Barriss Offee, is revealed, but only through Anakin Skywalker's independent investigation, not through the Republic's official process. The official process was satisfied with a convenient suspect. Ahsoka is cleared but leaves the Jedi Order, not because she was guilty, but because the process showed her what it really is. And crucially, after the case is closed, none of the methods used during the pursuit are taken back. The crucial aftermath is what did not happen. No reform allowed, no one investigated how an innocent person was nearly convicted, the security practices used during the pursuit were never reviewed, and the damage done to lower-level communities caught in the manhunt was never addressed. The expanded monitoring stayed in place, the aggressive pursuit methods remained available, the willingness to treat civilian populations as threat environments remained standard. All of it stayed, ready for next time. This is how the testing ground works. The crisis passes, but the response does not. Every crackdown leaves behind expanded capacity for the next crackdown. The emergency powers are never fully taken back. The Republic does not become more controlling all at once. It becomes more controlling one emergency at a time. The institutional endpoint of this process is the Empire, and the transition is not a sudden break. During the Republic era, the Coruscant Guard, clone troopers assigned to domestic security duties, represented the blurring of the line between military force and civilian policing. Soldiers were placed in charge of civilian law enforcement, armed troopers in full armor patrol civilian corridors, and over time, people stopped noticing how strange that was. Once that shift was accepted in one setting, it became easier to apply elsewhere. Under the Empire, militarized domestic security became standard practice across the galaxy. By then, the Imperial Security Bureau, the ISB, had become the polished and official version of what had been practiced informally for decades. Its methods and its thinking were not created when the new order was declared, they were developed step by step in places where nobody was watching. The ISB's selective enforcement scaled to cover an entire galaxy. The Republic to Empire transition did not create monsters, it created office workers. And the series Andor shows exactly what those office workers look like, and how ordinary the machinery of oppression actually sounds. The series Andor provides the most detailed look at how the ISB operates. The ISB central office on Coruscant features a briefing room where supervisors report to Major Leo Partagaz. Agents are assigned oversight of different galactic sectors, and each supervisor guards their territory, resisting sharing information, and chases targets based on career rewards rather than justice. They compete with each other the way mid-level managers compete in any large organization, jealous of their own budgets and protective of the cases that might earn them promotion. The language of office management is applied to the machinery of oppression. Partagaz runs the room by demanding details and punishing vagueness. The ordinariness is the point. The ISB does not look like tyranny, it looks like a performance review. The most frightening thing about the ISB is not its harshness, but how boring it looks. Oppression dressed in meeting agendas and progress reports. One scene in Andor shows the full horror of what this kind of thinking produces at scale. ISB Supervisor Dedra Meero authorized the use of Dr. Gorst's method on Bix Caleen, a civilian. The method was not crude, it was engineered. Gorst played audio recordings of a mass killing, the dying cries of an alien species being wiped out, and forced Bix to listen at close range. The sound itself was the instrument, the room was clean, and the procedure was documented. Meero stood and watched with the calm attention of a supervisor checking a process for results. That scene shows the testing ground logic made visible. A population was destroyed, their final moments were recorded, and the recording was turned into a tool for breaking the next person who needed to be controlled. The suffering of one group became the instrument used against the next. That is not cruelty for its own sake, it is organized, maintained, and carried out by people who consider themselves professionals. What makes this even more damning is that every single method the ISB uses can be traced directly back to the lower levels of Coruscant. Each specific method tracks directly from Republic-era lower-level practices to Imperial-era galactic policy. During the Republic, the Underworld Police enforced laws based on the upper-level interests. Theft of cargo headed upward was pursued aggressively, while conflict between lower-level residents was ignored. The ISB applied the same thinking across the galaxy, enforcing laws based on political usefulness, where the offense was not what you did, but who you were. That same selective approach shaped every other tool of control. Lower-level residents had long been turned into informants, providing intelligence not just about syndicate activity, but about political feelings and organized resistance. The line between crime prevention and political monitoring dissolved early on Coruscant, and the ISB's Galactic Informant program was built on that same framework. Checkpoints at key crossing points between upper and lower levels had served as unofficial borders for years, staffed by personnel with enormous power over who passed and who did not. The Empire simply applied the same idea to hyperspace, requiring travel papers between star systems and treating unauthorized movement as a crime. And the periodic sweeps that moved through the lower levels at regular intervals, officially about reducing criminal activity, but really about keeping people afraid, were renamed anti-rebel purges under the Empire. The methods were identical, only the label changed. Meanwhile, the Bad Batch showed how the new regime used the Senate's own procedures to tighten its grip. Clone Force 99 helped Senator Rio Chuchi expose Vice Admiral Rampart's lies about the destruction of Kamino, the clone home world. The evidence was presented to the Senate. The Senate responded not with reform, but by passing the Defense Recruitment Bill, expanding military conscription and speeding up the shift away from clone troopers entirely. The truth was absorbed and converted into more authority. Truth on Coruscant does not bring change. It gets absorbed and turned into a reason for tighter control. Nobody up top noticed the slide from democracy to authoritarian rule. The reason is built into the structure itself. The slide began below, and the flow of information, media, and political discussion was all organized around the upper levels. When a citizen up top heard about trouble in the underworld, they heard a story about bad people in a bad place. They did not hear a story about tested authoritarian methods. They heard the story the Republic told, and the Republic's story served the Republic's interests. This is not a conspiracy, it is something more effective than a conspiracy, a default setting. The default is to not know, to not look, and to accept the easy story, because the easy story is the only one available. People do not resist what they cannot see. They do not question methods they've never heard of, and by the time the controlling methods developed below are applied above, by the time the new order arrives, the citizens have already accepted the thinking. Safety requires control, control requires force, force requires targets. They accepted it when the targets were out of sight. They did not notice when the targets became themselves. Every tool the Empire uses to control the galaxy was first tried on the lower levels of Coruscant. Palpatine did not create a new approach, he took what already existed in the places nobody cared about and applied it everywhere. The Empire's achievement is not invention, it is scaling. After Order 66, even the survivors of the Jedi Order had nowhere left to go but down. After Order 66, the Legends novel Jedi Twilight by Michael Reeves shows what happens when the testing ground swallows everyone. The lower levels became the only place on Coruscant where survivors could hide. Jedi, political opponents, and ordinary people who were now enemies of the state all fled downward. Jax Pavan, a former Jedi Knight and the son of the information broker Lauren Pavan from Shadowhunter, hid himself in the Black Pit slums, working as an unlicensed private investigator. The irony is hard to miss. A man who grew up in the Jedi Temple, hundreds of levels above, now survived by being invisible in the very zones the Temple had ignored. An underground resistance network called Whiplash operated in those same lower levels, helping Jedi and political dissidents escape Imperial detection. They moved people through safe houses hidden in corridors that the Empire's maps did not cover, using routes that only locals knew, the same routes that syndicates had used for decades. Meanwhile, a Hutt crime lord named Rocco continued running his territory regardless of which government held power up top. The criminal governance structures carried on without pause from Republic to Empire. The Hutt did not care who sat in the Senate above. His power was built into the walls, not tied to any flag. These are Legends depictions, but canon material supports the same idea. The lower levels outlast whatever government sits above them. The neglect that turned the lower levels into a testing ground under the Republic made them hiding places under the Empire. The places that had been walked away from were the only places the new regime could not fully reach. What created the darkness was also what made the darkness survivable for those who needed it most. Those consequences do not stay buried. On Coruscant, nothing covered over ever truly disappears. Coruscant has been continuously lived in and built upon for thousands upon thousands of years. Each era adds a new construction on top of the old. The old is not torn down, it is closed in. This means the lowest levels contain buildings, technology, and remains from civilizations that existed before the Republic itself. Mid-levels contain the remains of multiple historical periods, stacked on top of each other in what amounts to a record of how the city grew and who it grew over. The current upper levels are the newest layer, gleaming, modern, and completely cut off from everything beneath them. And the full scale of what has been buried only becomes clear when you actually descend through the layers and read what is written in the walls. To see this buildup, descend through the layers as though moving through rock and soil, starting at the present and sinking towards the ancient. Start with what is closest to the current day, the lowest levels of recent construction, areas built within the last few centuries but already falling apart from neglect. These are not ancient ruins, they are modern slums, created by modern economic forces, modern policy decisions, and modern indifference to the people living inside them. It would be comforting to blame Coruscant's lower levels entirely on ancient history, on the weight of thousands of years piled up, but the newest lower levels prove that the process is still happening right now. New slums are being created in real time by the same government that sits in the Senate above. Go deeper though, and the modern slums give way to something even more unsettling. The ghost of a city that was once alive and now entirely swallowed. Go deeper and you reach the mid-layers, zones created during Coruscant's periods of rapid industrial growth. These levels were once the top, the cutting edge of city development in their time, the place where people lived and worked and raised families in neighborhoods they called home. Now, they're buried under centuries of later construction. The mid-layers often contain the remains of neighborhoods that were swallowed by industrial expansion, residential areas that were declared industrial zones, their populations forced downward, their homes converted into factories and warehouses. The people who lived in these neighborhoods did not choose to leave. They were priced out, zoned out, or simply built over. Walk through these levels now, and you can still see the outlines of what used to be a home pressed against the wall of what became a machine stop. Children's rooms turned into storage bays, front doors that open into corridors that no longer led anywhere, chemical traces that closed factories sit in walls and floors that were never cleaned because nobody thought the people living among them deserved clean walls. Deeper still, descending feels less like exploring a city and more like traveling backward through history itself. These are the ruins from before the Republic, containing the oldest construction on the planet. The design styles, the materials, and the scale are all different from anything above. Doorways are the wrong height, corridors curve in directions that make no sense by modern building standards. The writing on the walls, where it survives, may be in languages that no living being can read, carved by hands that belong to species the galaxy has long forgotten. Transit paths that went silent long ago lead to districts that no longer have names. Ruins of civilization that came before living memories sit in silence under immense weight in total darkness. But the physical dangers of the deep levels are not just the crumbling walls. Some of the most dangerous things down there are still running. The dangers down here are different from those above. Walls and floors made from ancient materials buckle under thousands of years of pressure, and entire corridors can give way without warning, closing off areas that may have been passable for centuries. Toxic materials from ancient industrial processes that modern science may not even recognize linger in the air and on every exposed surface. And rogue technology presents a danger unique to a planet this old. Automated machines, droids, maintenance units, and security programs that were installed centuries or thousands of years ago and never turned off. Their original programming has broken down over time, drifting into behaviors that no designer intended. It is easy to picture a maintenance droid endlessly repairing a pipe that connects to a building that no longer exists, following instructions from a work order that was filled before the current republic was founded, or a security program that challenges anyone who enters a hallway, demanding identification codes from a government that fell 1,000 years ago. These machines do not know their world has changed. They carry out their duties with a loyalty that would be almost admirable if it were not so dangerous, responding to intruders who were only intruders by the standards of a civilization that no longer exists. Somewhere in the deepest levels, a machine still follows orders that nobody alive remembers giving. It cannot stop, and no one is coming to turn it off. And the machines are not the only things that adapted to survive down there. Life found a way too, though not the kind anyone up top would recognize. Then there are the creatures. In the permanent dark, life adapts. Coruscant's lowest levels host organisms that evolved for a world without light, eyeless, sensitive to vibration, and feeding on the organic waste that drips down from above. Some are descendants of animals that once lived on Coruscant's natural ground before that ground was buried under 1,000 levels of construction. Over countless generations, they changed. Eyes became useless and disappeared. Other senses sharpened to take their place. Skin adapted to absorb moisture from the damp air rather than relying on open water. Others were brought in from elsewhere, escaped pets, laboratory specimens, and livestock from crashed cargo ships. And over generations, they too adapted into something their original species would no longer recognize. The lowest levels are an ecosystem of their own, built not by nature, but by what happens when nature is buried alive and left to find its own way. The Legends novel Shadowhunter by Michael Reeves describes some of these creatures in detail. Thons are underground beings encountered in the novel's deepest levels, eyeless and adapted to total darkness, hunting anything that enters their territory with instincts sharpened by centuries of evolution in a world without light. The novel also features the Tauzen, a massive predator found deep below that is resistant to the Force itself. Darth Maul cannot sense it. Even the Force behaves differently in these deep levels, and the creatures that adapted there have developed defenses against abilities that are standard in the world above. These are Legends depictions, but canon supports the broader idea that Coruscant's deep levels are home to life forms unlike anything up top. The larger point stands in both continuities. Coruscant buried its own natural world and created something alien in the process. When something stops working, Coruscant does not fix it, remove it, or learn from it. It closes it off and builds something new on top. The work stands as the clearest monument to this habit. Already discussed in Chapter 1 as part of the city's inner workings, the works also tells a story about how Coruscant handles failure. The district that once powered an industrial age now sits decaying inside the structure that it helped build, walled off beneath layers of newer construction that pretends it does not exist. That is not just managing a city, it is choosing to forget. And the scale of that forgetting is staggering. The result is a planet that contains its entire history, pressed together and walled in, layer upon layer, century upon century. Each layer is a time capsule of the era that built it, and because the city is continuous, those time capsules are never dug up, studied, or processed. They are simply built over. The waste of one century becomes the floor of the next, the homes of one generation become the ruins beneath another, and the people who lived in these homes, their stories, their struggles, and their claims on the city are buried along with the walls that held them. Nobody up top has ever read the record beneath their feet. Each layer tells the story of who had power, what they built, what they tore down, and what they left behind. The answers to questions the Republic has never asked are written in the walls of levels nobody visits. The upper city does not look down, it never has. The city does this with waste, it does this with people, it does this with policy, and it does this with history. Now at the very bottom, beneath the most sacred building on the most important planet in the galaxy, something is waiting. Beneath the brightest building in the galaxy, something was waiting. The Jedi Temple is the most visible structure on Coruscant. It sits at the center of the city's skyline, its 5 towers reaching towards a control sky, a symbol of the Jedi Order's authority, wisdom, and connection to the Force. For thousands of years, it was the heart of the light side of the Force in the galaxy. Every Jedi who trained, meditated, or sought guidance within its walls did so believing that this building represented the highest expression of their purpose. Every generation of younglings who walked through its doors believed they were entering the safest, purest place in the galaxy. It was built on something that had been waiting far longer than any of them. Not a symbol of something wrong, but real physical force-pouring wrongness. An ancient shrine built in an era when dark side influence reached Coruscant, long before the current Republic existed. As described in the canon novel Tarkin by James Luceno, the shrine was a center of dark side energy, a wound in the Force that bled hatred into the stone above it. This is not a minor piece of background lore, it is one of the most important reveals in canon Star Wars material, and it changes the meaning of the Jedi Order, the Republic, and the fall of both. The brightest symbol in the galaxy was built on a foundation of concentrated evil, and the people who built it there knew exactly what they were doing. And what makes this worse is that the Jedi did not stumble onto the shrine by accident. They knew it was there, and they chose to build on top of it anyway. According to Luceno's novel, deep beneath what had become the Imperial Palace, in a small rock wall space beneath the deepest of the palace's several sublevels, sat what had once been an ancient shrine. The Jedi had raised their temple over it, and that fact had been one of the most closely guarded secrets of those who had carried out the 1,000-year revenge plan against the Jedi Order. The Jedi knew the shrine was there. This is important. They did not stumble onto it by accident. They chose to build on top of it. Their reasoning was logical, even noble. By placing the center of the light side directly above a concentration of dark side power, they believed they would cancel it out, overwhelming what was below with what was above. It seemed like wisdom at the time, a bold act by the most powerful Force users in the galaxy. It did not work. As Luceno describes, even the most powerful among the dark side followers believed that shrines of this kind existed only on distant worlds far from Coruscant. And even the most powerful of the Jedi believed that the power built into the shrine had been cancelled out and contained for good. Both sides were wrong. In truth, that power had crept upward and outward since the shrine was covered over. It had worked its way into the hallways and rooms above, weakening the Jedi Order in the same way that the architects of the revenge plan themselves had secretly crept into the corridors of political power and brought down the Republic from within. The Jedi had not beaten the darkness, they had simply given it a ceiling to press against, and over thousands of years, it pressed through. For thousands of years, the influence beneath the temple did not fight, it did not struggle, it simply waited, and waiting for the dark side cost nothing at all. And that waiting is not unique to the shrine, it is what Coruscant does with everything it refuses to face. The shrine sat on top of what is described as a natural wellspring of Force energy, a place where the Force gathers in unusual strength. A wellspring like this is neither good nor harmful on its own. It can be shaped towards many purposes. The Sacred Spire, one of the last visible natural features on Coruscant, is the mountain peak at the center of the Jedi Temple, the natural anchor around which the entire structure was built. On a planet where virtually every trace of the natural world has been buried under construction, the spire stands as a reminder that something older than any government still exists at the heart of the city. The temple was not placed randomly, it was placed on the most powerful Force-sensitive location on the planet, and the dark side had already claimed it first. The canon novel Into the Dark by Claudia Gray gives the shrine its formal name, the Shrine in the Depths. The name itself says everything. It is literally named for being below. Gray's novel, set during the High Republic era, roughly 200 years before the prequel films, also indicates that the Jedi used the broader underground complex beneath the temple as a storage site for dark side objects. Items too dangerous to keep in the open but too important to destroy were brought down and placed in the vaults beneath the temple. A group of powerful masters studied these ancient objects, joining their minds together in the Force. When they gathered their focus to examine the objects, they found no trace of the dark side at all. The Jedi took this as success, believing the wellspring had scattered the harmful energy into the wider Force, dissolving it the way a poison might be diluted in clean water. But the two canon sources that describe the shrine do not fully agree with each other, and the tension reveals something important on its own. Tarkin describes the deepest chamber of the shrine as untouched for close to 5,000 years. Into the Dark, set centuries before the prequel era, shows the Jedi accessing parts of the broader complex beneath the temple during the High Republic period. The most likely reading is that the Jedi used the outer levels of the underground site while the innermost shrine remained forgotten, buried even within the burial. But this tension itself makes the point. Even the people who built on top of the problem could not fully agree on what they were standing over or how deep it went. By bringing darkside objects to the site and storing them there, the Jedi may have been feeding the very thing they believed they had beaten, bringing more of what they feared to the place where it was already strongest, adding weight to what was already pressing upward through the stone. What is clear is that the shrine's influence did not fade over the centuries. It persisted, patient and constant, while the order above grew more confident that the problem beneath their feet had been solved long ago. Even at its peak during the High Republic era, the Jedi Order carried this blind spot. The Jedi of this period were expanding into the Outer Rim, building new outposts, and presenting themselves as the galaxy's guardians with a certainty that left little room for doubt. They were at their strongest, their most numerous, and their most respected. They looked outward with great ambition, while the ground beneath them carried a secret that none of their ambition could address. Their strength made them certain, and their certainty made them blind, not to outside threats, but to the one that had lived beneath their feet since the day the temple was raised. And while the Jedi looked outward with confidence, someone else was sitting beneath their feet and drawing strength from exactly what they refused to face. Palpatine knew about the shrine. He visited it, he drew power from it, while the Jedi meditated in the chambers above, reaching out through the Force for clarity. The man who would destroy them sat in the room below, drawing strength from the very thing that clouded their reach. He operated from Coruscant for decades, planning the fall of the Republic, within walking distance of the Jedi Temple, and the Jedi never sensed him. Luceno's novel strongly implies that the shrine's dark side energy, bleeding through the foundations of the Jedi's own temple for centuries, clouded their ability to see what was happening around them. The thing they covered over worked against them from below. The building that was supposed to stand for light was, from its foundation, weakened by what the Jedi refused to face. And the man who would destroy them used that weakness every single day, drawing strength from the same ground where the Jedi sought peace. What made Palpatine so effective was not raw power, it was his understanding of what other people refused to look at. No one in the galaxy was better positioned to understand the power of buried things. He built his entire rise on structures that already existed, but that no one in power bothered to examine. The corruption in the Senate, the rigidity of the Jedi, the fractures in the Outer Rim, the forgotten populations on the lower levels. He did not create any of these conditions. He simply recognized what they were, studied their pressure points, and applied force where it would do the most damage. The shrine was the oldest and deepest of those buried weaknesses, and he treated it the way he treated every hidden flaw in the Republic, not as a problem to be fixed, but as a tool to be used. And the timeline of that influence stretches back further than almost anyone realizes. Thousands of years. That is how long the influence had been building. According to Luceno's account, thousands of years of darkside energy working through stone, inch by inch, year by year, weakening the awareness of every Jedi who called the temple home. Generations of masters trained there, meditated there, and made decisions that shaped the galaxy there, and not one of them felt what was beneath their feet. The shrine did not need to overpower the light, it only needed to last. And lasting for the dark side was effortless. Time was on its side. It always has been. The idea behind the shrine has roots in real history. Conquering civilizations have often built their temples and churches on top of the sacred sites of the people they defeated. James Luceno himself compared the shrine to how the Spanish conqueror Hernan Cortes leveled the Aztec city of Tenochtitlan and built churches on top of the raised temples. In Luceno's view, the Jedi tried to cap the power of the shrine, but there was leakage. It was not just about any single person, it was the power of history, what remained of the dark side influence buried there. That phrase, the power of history, applies to more than the shrine. It applies to every level of Coruscant. The lower levels are accumulated history, and that history has weight. It does not fade simply because new construction is placed on top of it. The Undercity does not just endure history, it is where history is made. Every significant turning point in the galaxy's story, from the hiding of the Sith to the rise of the Empire, drew on tools, information, or hiding places found in the levels below. The decisions made in gleaming Senate chambers were shaped by forces that had been growing in the forgotten places for centuries. Forces that the decision makers could not sense because the very building they worked in had been weakened from beneath. The power that finally consumed the Republic did not descend from above, it rose from below, from a shrine that the galaxy's greatest protectors thought they had buried. The Jedi did not lose to their ancient enemy because that enemy was stronger. They lost because they built their home on a lie. The lie that you can cover over what frightens you and walk away. After the fall, the Jedi Temple became the Imperial Palace, 3 layers of power built on top of each other, and each one inherited what lay beneath. The Dark Lords built the shrine, the Jedi built the temple over it, the Empire seized the temple and made it the palace. Each believed they had replaced what came before. None of them escaped what was underneath. The transformation from temple to palace was not simply a change of ownership, it was a statement of conquest. Palpatine chose the Jedi Temple as his seat of power deliberately. He did not need new buildings, he needed the buildings of his enemies, claimed and repurposed, so that every hallway the Jedi once walked would now echo with the footsteps of Imperial officers. The meditation chambers became planning rooms, the training halls became reception galleries, the archives that once held the collected knowledge of the Jedi Order were restricted or rewritten to serve the new regime. Holocrons that had guided thousands of years of Jedi learning were locked away or destroyed. The very rooms where younglings had first felt the Force were emptied, scrubbed clean of any trace that the Order had ever existed. And beneath all of it, the shrine that had weakened the Jedi for centuries now served under a new master, one who understood exactly what it was and drew on its power openly rather than trying to bury it. Wisdom became domination, and the foundation beneath both remained unchanged, patient, and disturbed, feeding on the neglect of everyone who chose not to look down. The Jedi believed that building on top of what frightened them would cancel it out. Coruscant believed that building on top of poverty would contain it. The Republic believed that ignoring the lower levels would keep the consequences from reaching the upper city. In each case, the act of covering over was presented as strength. In each case, it was the opposite. The Jedi were confident, the Republic was wealthy, the upper city was beautiful, and beneath all of it, the covered over things grew stronger, feeding on the very neglect that was supposed to contain them. Confidence became blindness, wealth became insulation, beauty became a mask over rot. The Republic fell not because of a single act of betrayal, it fell because of thousands of years of unprocessed consequences stacked so high and pressed so deep that the people on top could no longer feel what was underneath them. The shrine beneath the Jedi Temple is the perfect symbol. The Republic built its highest ideal on a foundation it refused to face, and what lay beneath won, not by overpowering the light, but by waiting until the light forgot it was there. The Jedi did not reach them, the Republic did not reach them, the Empire certainly did not reach them. And whatever hopeful banner was raised over the Senate Dome when the last Star Destroyer fell, the people 1,000 levels down had no reason to believe it would change anything. They had seen governments come and go, the corridors stayed the same. Somewhere right now, 1,000 levels below a senator's office, someone is fixing a water recycler. They have never seen the sky, they have never voted, but without them, the senator would be thirsty. The galaxy's refusal to see that person, to truly see them, is not just a failure of kindness, it is how everything eventually falls apart. Palpatine did not only use what others had buried, he built and hid projects of his own in complete secrecy, and the largest of them all sat under Coruscant the entire time the Empire stood. In the year 7 ABY, a New Republic general named Crix Medine watched something impossible climb out of the city of Coruscant. By that point, the ship had been buried on Coruscant for years, hidden through the latter part of the Galactic Civil War. None of his intelligence analysts, none of his spies, and none of his rebel scouts had ever placed it on a map. As the warship cleared the atmosphere, he said a single thing out loud. The ship had not come to fight, it was running. Even as the ruler of the galaxy, he had already prepared a way to escape. Across both canon and legends, the same pattern keeps surfacing. A ruler of the entire galaxy spent his reign building escape plans, hiding them from his closest subordinates, and placing them beneath his own throne. The ship under Coruscant was only the largest piece of evidence. Most of what is known about the Lusankya comes from Legends material, where its burial, its use as a prison, and its role as an escape plan are described in full. Canon sources confirm the ship's existence and its construction, but not the full scope of how it was used. Before the ground ever opened, what the Empire was burying was already a secret. The records hid one ship, the capital hid another. The Legends reference book, The Essential Guide to Warfare, documents how the Navy had long treated the Super Star Destroyer as a second-tier project, a prestige concession that the service accepted as a lesser evil once the Death Star overshadowed naval priorities. That standing reversed overnight at Yavin. When rebel pilots destroyed the battle station, the giant warships the Empire had treated as backdrop became the main program. What looked from the outside like a panicked response had started long before the panic. Legends reference material identifies the Kuat-built ship's internal name during construction. It was called Executor 2. In Imperial records, there was only ever one Super Star Destroyer in progress, and that ship was Vader's public flagship at Fondor. The second ship did not exist on paper. By listing all of the Lusankya's costs as part of the Executor's construction, the Empire kept the second hull's existence a secret from the galaxy. The cover story did its work. Outside observers, including rebel intelligence and rival Imperial power centers, never learned that a second hull existed. Years later, New Republic analyst Winter would confirm the trick in a briefing to Rogue Squadron. Both shipyards had insisted they alone built the Executor, neither was lying. The two warships were identical by design, and only the Fondor ship ever joined the public fleet. The other, wherever it was, had a different destination. That destination was not a shipyard, not a port, and not even orbit. Before that reveal, the pattern deserves context, because the Lusankya was not the first thing Palpatine hid using this method. The novel Catalyst documents the same deception running across the Death Star itself. The superweapon had been hidden behind a public program called Project Celestial Power, presented to the galaxy as a clean energy effort. Components were built under fake names like Stellar Sphere, Mark Omega, and Pax Aurora. Whole teams of scientists worked inside what the same storyline calls fake divisions, never told what their research actually built. The canon novel Tarkin extends the rule further. No base commander, no Moff, no admiral, and no general was ever given full access to information on the Death Star shipments, timelines, or building progress. The book reveals that the Emperor was the only person who knew the complete story of the project. A ruler that was determined to control information was a ruler determined never to lose control of his own escape, and that rule, applied to a warship, is how a secret this size stays buried. The same novel shows one more detail that matters for what comes next. During the construction of the military intelligence complex on Coruscant, Palpatine ordered tiny hidden cameras installed in every corner of the building, so he could watch and listen to his own spy masters at any hour. The ruler of the galaxy did not trust even the people he had chosen to run his secret service. Surveillance was only one half of the habit. The other half was preparing for the day he might need to disappear from his own throne. The same mindset, taken further, produced something much larger. The Emperor's next move was to bury a Super Star Destroyer beneath Coruscant's cityscape, on the later site linked to Armand Izard's old underground headquarters. The reference book, The Essential Guide to Warfare, reveals something that most fans do not know. The name Lusankya had existed long before the ship did. It was originally a forgotten district of Galactic City on Coruscant, a part of the capital that had been buried under later construction and turned into a hidden prison by the Senate Bureau of Intelligence. The director of that agency was a man named Armand Izard, whose daughter Isan grew up inside the buried facility. So when Palpatine buried the Super Star Destroyer, he did not choose a random spot. He placed it directly on top of a site that had already been used to hide things beneath the capital. The warship inherited the name of the district above it and the tradition of secrecy that came with it. The city itself was rebuilt on top of the ship. Starships of the galaxy galaxy gives the cleanest version of the burial. The finished warship was wrapped in a massive outer frame of beams and electronics. That shell was designed to make the Lusankya look, from the outside, like a giant planetary shield generator. Beneath it sat a second structure, a huge six-sided platform made of thousands of repulsor lift cells stitched together. The whole disguised package was then lowered onto the surface and sealed into the planet. The Legends novel Wedge's Gamble confirms the general mechanism. Giant Imperial construction droids routinely tore down and rebuilt Coruscant's cityscape, large enough to reshape whole districts as part of the capital's ongoing construction cycle. The tools for hiding something under the surface were already in regular use above it. In the Kratos Trap, New Republic General Aaron Kraken adds the missing piece. The rebellion, he explains, had earlier traced enormous Imperial procurement of repulsor lift components, but had never been able to pin down where the shipments were going. After the launch, the answer was clear. Those parts had gone into the ship's lifting cradle. Droids erased a district and rebuilt a new one on top of the hidden warship. From street level, nothing looked unusual. The mechanical part, however, was solvable. The part no one has ever fully explained is how the Emperor kept every witness quiet. Thousands of workers, engineers, and pilots saw the burial happen. Any one of them could have spoken. The most direct statement on record comes from the one person Palpatine eventually trusted with the ship, and even she could not solve the mystery. The book Izard's Revenge records it in her own words. Ivan Izard, the Emperor's director of Imperial intelligence, described the burial as a mystery she never cracked. She knew where and when the Lusankya had been created, and she knew the date it was given to her. As head of Imperial intelligence, however, she could find no clue as to how the warship had been placed into the planet. Her best guess involved the Force, a power she did not understand and could not use. The Sith Lord, she said, may have pulled the warship down and buried it directly through the dark side itself, or he may have reached out with his mind and blocked anyone from noticing the descent as it happened. She could not rule either idea out. In the same storyline, Wedge Antilles reached a darker answer. If Palpatine had not used the Force to wipe the memories of every witness, then the likely alternative was that the Emperor had ordered the deaths of every person who saw the ship go into the ground. Either way, the secret held. The same ruler who wired his own spy agency with surveillance during its construction was not a ruler who left a burial operation to chance. One way or another, the witnesses stopped being a problem. Once the warship was in the ground, it was given over. Izard's Revenge records the handover. The Emperor took his stand there alone, through one of what the book calls his hidden sanctums and side palaces scattered across Coruscant. Palpatine gave her privileged access to the buried warship and had her private quarters finished in fine, rare woods chosen to please her. The ship's handover was treated as a singular act of trust given to the one person the Emperor kept closest to the operation. The same novel gives a clean date for the handover. The Sith Lord told her its location at roughly the same time its sister ship, the Executor, entered service. The handover happened in parallel with the public flagship's commissioning, not after it. The two ships, and the two men who would command them in the Emperor's name, rose together. Why this woman? That question has a complicated answer, and it is the first hint of what Palpatine actually planned to use the Lusankya for. Her background is laid out in the Bacta War. Isan Izard took her father's job after selling him out as a suspected supporter of the rebellion. She turned her own father in, took his position as director of Imperial intelligence, and served the Emperor from the top of his own spy agency. Rumors inside the Empire also held that she had once been one of Palpatine's lovers, a claim the novel records as part of her reputation. What the sources confirm is the betrayal. The woman Palpatine chose as custodian of the Lusankya had risen through her own family treachery, and the Emperor placed a hidden warship in her hands anyway, which matches what the ship became. Under the director, the Lusankya turned into something else entirely. In the Kratos Trap, General Kraken describes the program. People who came out of the buried warship had been brainwashed into Imperial operatives who would turn on their own friends, family, and commanders when Izard activated them. Prisoners were given code markings. Rogue Squadron pilots Koran Horn and Tycho Selchu were both labeled C-Status R1, meaning resistant in the early phase. Each pilot had been run through simulator flights designed to get them to fire on rebel symbols. Both refused. The Empire marked them as failures and kept them locked up anyway. A prison this elaborate, inside a warship this size, was never really built for the the prisoners. It was built for the man who owned it. The prisoners believed they were deep underground in some distant backwater world. The inside of the warship had been built to match that lie in every detail. The novel describes the prison block as made to look ground and drilled out of solid rock, with thick dust, uneven rock walls, and worn tools that convinced captives the place had been built before the Clone Wars. Inmates worked fake shifts with sledgehammers inside a staged gravel mine. Elsewhere in the same facility, on the route Corran Horn later used to escape, a 10-foot hologram of the Emperor stood in another chamber, placed to block the exact spot of a hidden escape lift. The lie about where the prisoners were standing was not for them, it was for the day a real escape plan needed every secret around it to hold. The prison took people the galaxy thought were already dead. Jan Dodona, the rebel general who had planned the Death Star attack at Yavin, sat inside that complex for 7 years. The galaxy believed he had died during the evacuation of Yavin 4. He was alive the entire time, locked up under the Capitol. As detailed in the same book, Derek Waziri, husband of New Republic intelligence officer Yella Waziri, was broken inside the facility and turned into a sleeper killer who did not remember his time there at all. What Izard did to the mine, however, was only the half of it the prisoners could see. Another inmate carried a secret his killers built into his own body. Erlor Sete had a hidden device sewn inside him. When Corran Horn identified him by name at a later Rogue Squadron gathering, the implant recognized Corran's stored voice print and activated. Blood poured from his eyes and nose. His bones snapped under their own weight, and he died on the spot. The Empire had built remote kill switches into the bodies of its own prisoners so that no escaped agent would ever live long enough to tell the story. Corran summed it up in one line: people who came out of there, he said, were human remote weapons. They did terrible things when the Empire switched them on, none of which made sense as the work of a prison. It made perfect sense as the work of a contingency, kept alive in case the man who built it ever needed deniable agents in a galaxy that had stopped recognizing his rule. When Corran himself was finally captured, Izard called the Lusankia her private workshop for people like him. He became the first prisoner ever to escape, a feat the novel calls never before successfully accomplished. When he worked his way out of the fake mine and looked back, he discovered something that changed what the Lusankia had really been. The bulkhead doors he had assumed were pulled from wrecked ships were actually part of a ship. The prisoners had been living packed inside the lower part of an Imperial Super Star Destroyer dressed up to look like a hole in the ground, which left the question that the buried warship had been quietly raising the whole time. The cells were elaborate. The ship around them was overkill. The handful of cells that held Dodona, Tycho, and Corran could have fit inside a bunker a tiny fraction of the ship's size. A prison does not need hyperdrives, a crew of over 250,000, or a full stormtrooper force, so that was what the rest of the Lusankia was for. The Legends novel, The Back to War, answers it in a single line from Winter's briefing. The Lusankia had been buried on Coruscant, in her words, probably to serve as the Emperor's getaway ship. This was the same conclusion General Medine reached watching the launch above Coruscant, a ship heading out, not digging in, escape, not conquest. Starships of the Galaxy pushes the answer further. The book describes the Lusankia as fully equipped to smash through a planet's defenses by itself and take control of its major cities. Unlike other Super Star Destroyers, which needed support fleets, it was, on its own, enough to build a new small multi-planet government. The design proves it. The Lusankia had fewer heavy guns than a standard executor class, trading firepower for more troop space, better computers, and room for prisoners. Taken together, the sources make the Lusankia read less like a warship and more like a mobile seat of power. If the capital ever fell, Palpatine could board, launch, seize a new world, and rebuild his rule from the hull outward. He would arrive with his own stormtrooper force, his own command staff, and his own prisoners for interrogation. One ship would carry the operational backbone of a surviving empire. The novel Lords of the Sith shows the same habit on a smaller scale. When a rebel sabotage attempt threatened a Star Destroyer the Emperor was aboard, Sidious calmly told Vader he had a second escape shuttle ready in a different hangar and had not bothered to mention it. Vader had not known about the backup shuttle, but he was not surprised. His master prepared for almost every outcome. The Lusankia is the same instinct, scaled up to the size of a capital ship. The technical breakdown in Starships of the Galaxy confirms the design with hard numbers. The Lusankia carried 207,381 crew, 57,000 troops, and could hold 115,000 prisoners. It launched 72 starfighters carriers along with up to 1,000 smaller craft for landing. Winter, in her briefing, had already made the scale clear in human terms. The crew alone was equal to 25 times the population of Thyfera, a small nation living inside a single warship, all of them kept secret. In an unsettling detail, the reference book adds that the Lusankya actually required fewer crew than a standard Super Star Destroyer because it ran better computers. Those computers had been, in the book's own words, constantly receiving upgrades while hidden within Coruscant. Being buried had made the ship smarter. Palpatine never got to use it. The Emperor died over Endor in 4 ABY before the capital was ever attacked. The warship stayed on the ground, still waiting. The only person who knew where to find it was still alive. For 3 years, Izard kept the Lusankya safe as the Empire came apart. The Essential Guide to Warfare describes her rise during this time. By 5 ABY, with rival warlords fighting each other across the galaxy, she had become the real ruler of what was left of the New Order, with a permanent guard of Imperial Royal Guards. Meanwhile, the New Republic was closing in on Coruscant. In 7 ABY, with rebel forces inside the city, she did exactly what Palpatine had designed the ship to do. Wedge's Gamble lays out her preparation in her own words. She would move herself, she told her second-in-command Kirtan Lu, to her Lusankya facility, where she had the seeds of the rebellion's destruction that needed time to grow. Above ground, she left a sleeper terror network called the Palpatine Counterinsurgency Front. Below ground, she started the engines of the buried warship. The launch is described in order in the Krytos trap. Green turbo laser fire broke through the ferrocrete shell the ship had been sealed inside. The 6-sided repulsor lift cradle switched on, and the whole structure lifted free of the planet. Thrusters ignited, burning away even more of the cityscape above. More than 100 square kilometers of Coruscant's surface was erased in the launch itself, with millions of residents left missing and presumed dead. The warship broke through Coruscant's 2 planetary shields, traded fire briefly with an orbital Golan defense platform, jettisoned the 6-sided cradle that had held it underground, and jumped to hyperspace toward Thyfera, the back-to-producing planet whose medical monopoly would let Izard do exactly what Palpatine's blueprint prescribed: set up a new capital, seize a resource the galaxy could not live without, rule from a ship. Which means the one person who actually used the Lusankya the way Palpatine built it to be used was not Palpatine. It was the woman he had handed it to. She executed this plan in 7 ABY. The only difference was that the capital she chose to relocate to was not hers to keep. Rogue Squadron ran her down at Thyfera. Captain Joke Drizzo ordered the warship to ram Thyfera rather than surrender, but the bridge command shifted to acting Captain Warowin before that could happen. Warowin surrendered the ship to the New Republic. Izard's revenge later shows Isan's own end. Years after the Back to War, Izard resurfaced and attempted to seize the rebuilt Lusankya during a period of Imperial political collapse. She boarded the warship, was cornered inside her own former quarters, and was shot dead by New Republic officer Yella Wasiri. The architect of the brainwashing program died inside the prison she had built. The ship her father's buried facility had inspired, the prison she had used to break others, the escape plan she had executed for a dead emperor. All of it ended with her body inside the same hull. The ship remained in New Republic hands for roughly 2 decades, passing through the refit, storage, and active service. The Legends comic series Crimson Empire, set 7 years after Endor, depicts the ongoing Imperial collapse during this period, with surviving warlords fighting each other while the Lusankya begins its new life under Rebel command. Later reference material, including the Essential Guide to Warfare, makes clear that other Executor-class vessels surfaced in Imperial hands during this period, and the New Republic eventually refitted the Lusankya for combat because it could not rule out meeting other super heavy threats in the fragmented Empire. Wedge Antilles eventually used the Lusankya himself at the Battle of Borleas in 28 ABY, in an operation he called Emperor's Hammer. He turned the ship's guns on a Yuuzhan Vong invasion force and unleashed the kind of single-handed orbital bombardment Palpatine had designed the warship to deliver. The narration in the novel Rebel Dream, written from the view of pilot Jaina Solo, caused the long arc in a single line. The Lusankya, the book states, was finally carrying out the purpose for which she had been built, before Jaina had even been born. The ship's story ended there. The pattern it belonged to did not. The Essential Guide to Warfare includes a passage worth remembering. The 4 Super Star Destroyers the galaxy knew about publicly were the Executor, the Aggressor, the Brawl, and the Reaper. 4 ships, 4 flagships. Inside New Republic intelligence files, however, the true estimates ran much higher. More than 20, the source states, were thought to have been built. An exact count, in the tech's own words, proved nearly impossible to track for rebel investigators. Palpatine had ordered some of them built outside the records, kept in reserve at secret Imperial bases, sent into the unknown regions, or hidden for what the work calls the Emperor's own dark purposes. The Lusankya is named as the known example, the rest were never accounted for. The Lusankya was the one buried weapon the galaxy dug up. Of the more than 20 legends suggest were built, the others vanish into the records, and some may never have existed at all. A ruler who controlled the entire galaxy spent his reign hiding escape craft from his own apprentice, wiring cameras into his own spy agency, and parking a warship under his own capital in case any of it ever failed him, which is the question the ship leaves behind. The man who engineered the fall of the Republic, who survived 1,000 years of Sith planning, who ruled every world worth ruling, never stopped preparing to run. From what? The rebellion he was already grinding down, a successor he had personally chosen and broken, a galaxy that, by every visible measure, was already his. The buried warship answers in the only way a Sith Lord never says aloud. He did not believe in his own victory. The man who controlled everything spent his reign planning to escape from it because somewhere underneath the throne and the apprentice and the title, he expected the whole structure to come apart. The Lusankya was not a contingency for his enemies, it was a contingency for the day he stopped trusting his own grip on the galaxy he had already won. That fear of losing everything shaped every hidden plan Palpatine ever made, and the warship beneath Coruscant was only the beginning. But the story does not end here. Canon material reveals that on the hidden world of Exegol, the Emperor secretly built an entire fleet, more than 1,000 Star Destroyers ready to conquer the galaxy all over again if he ever fell. See how he did it next.